The marble floor was cold beneath her knees. Vivian Hale, Duchess of Blackthorn, 7 months pregnant and draped in silver silk worth more than most estates, pressed one trembling hand against the pillar and listened to her husband plan her disappearance. Behind the stone column, Adrian's voice, the same voice that had whispered vows in candlelit churches, was calm, almost bored. Once the child arrives, we'll have her declared unfit. Sign the papers. It'll be clean. The woman with him laughed. Not a nervous titter, a knowing, satisfied laugh. And in that moment, Vivian understood. Tonight's glittering ball wasn't a celebration. It was her funeral, and everyone had been invited to watch. Stay with me until the end. Drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Hit that like button. You won't believe where this goes. The first crack in Vivian's perfect life came at 9:47 p.m., beneath a chandelier that cost more than a small village. She'd been standing near the refreshment table, one hand resting on the swell of her belly, the other holding a crystal flute of sparkling water she hadn't sipped. Pregnancy had made her cautious about everything, food, drink, even the way she stood. Dr. Pemberton had been very clear, bed rest, limited activity, no stress, but Adrian had insisted she attend tonight's ball. Appearances matter, Vivian, especially now. So here she was, dressed in a gown that had required 2 maids and 40 minutes to lace properly, smiling at people whose names she barely remembered, pretending her back didn't ache and her feet weren't screaming inside shoes designed for beauty rather than comfort. The ballroom was magnificent. Blackthorn Estate always was. 12-foot ceilings adorned with frescoes depicting the family's supposed glory. Battles won, lands conquered, marriages that secured empires. Marble columns imported from Italy. Floors polished to a mirror shine. Everything Adrian touched looked flawless from a distance. Duchess Blackthorn. Lord Pembroke appeared at her elbow, smelling of brandy and expensive cologne that couldn't quite mask the scent of cigars. "You look radiant this evening." "You're very kind." The smile came automatically now. Vivian had been practicing it for 3 years, ever since she'd married into this world that glittered like broken glass. "The Duke must be thrilled. An heir on the way." Pembroke's eyes flicked to her stomach with the sort of proprietary interest that made her skin crawl. "Boy or girl, do you know?" "We haven't asked." Another smile. This one was harder. "We want to be surprised." "Ah, traditional. I like that." Pembroke drained his glass. "Though between us, everyone's hoping for a son. The Blackthorn line needs—" "Excuse me." Vivian turned away before he could finish. She'd heard this conversation 100 times. The Blackthorn line needs. The estate requires. The family expects. As if she were simply a vessel, important only for what she could produce. She moved through the crowd slowly, her gown trailing behind her like liquid moonlight. The dress had been Adrian's choice. Everything was Adrian's choice. What she wore, where she went, who she spoke to. He called it guidance. She was starting to recognize it as something else. Where was he anyway? Vivian scanned the ballroom. A string quartet played Vivaldi in the corner. Couples danced with practiced grace. Servers in crisp uniforms glided between guests with trays of champagne and delicate pastries that looked like art. Everyone was beautiful, wealthy, powerful. Everyone was pretending very hard that they weren't all slowly drowning in debt and scandal, propped up by ancient names and dwindling fortunes. There, near the east wall, Adrian stood with a group of men, Lord Ashford, Baron Wickham, someone she didn't recognize. They were laughing at something, heads bent together in that particular way men had when they thought no one important was listening. Her husband looked perfect, as always. Tall, dark hair swept back, jaw sharp enough to cut. The kind of handsome that had made her stupid at 19. She was 22 now. Still stupid, apparently, but learning. Adrian glanced up, caught her eye across the room, and smiled. It was the smile he used in public. Warm, devoted, carefully calibrated. He excused himself from the group and crossed to her. "Darling." He took her hand, pressed his lips to her knuckles. The gesture looked tender. His grip was just tight enough to hurt. "You should be sitting down." Dr. Pemberton said, "I'm fine." Vivian tried to pull her hand back. His fingers tightened. "You look pale." Adrian's voice was low, concerned, perfectly pitched for the people watching. "Perhaps you should retire for the evening. I can make your excuses." "I said I'm fine." Something flickered in his eyes. Annoyance, maybe, or calculation. Then the devoted husband mask slid back into place. Of course, you know your limits better than I do. He released her hand. I need to speak with Lord Ashford about some business. Boring financial matters. You won't miss me. He was gone before she could respond, moving back toward the group of men with that confident stride that said he owned every inch of space he occupied. Vivian stood there, one hand pressed to her lower back, and tried to remember when exactly she'd started feeling like a stranger in her own marriage. No, that was a lie. She knew exactly when. 4 months ago. The night she'd found the letter. She'd been looking for Adrian's reading glasses in his study. He'd misplaced them again, and he had documents to review. The desk drawer had been partially open. Inside, beneath a stack of business correspondence, a single envelope. Cream-colored paper, expensive. No address, no seal. Just her husband's name in elegant handwriting that definitely wasn't hers. She shouldn't have read it. She'd read it. My darling Adrian, last night was exquisite. I still feel your hands on my skin. This pretense grows more difficult each day, watching you with her, knowing what we share in darkness. But soon. You promised me soon. Once the child is born and your position is secure, we'll have what we deserve. Until then, I remain yours in shadow. L. Vivian had stood in the study for 20 minutes, the letter trembling in her hands, trying to make the words say something different, trying to rewrite them into a joke, a misunderstanding, anything but what they obviously were. When Adrian had found her there, she'd been ready to confront him, demand answers, scream, maybe, or throw something. But he'd looked at her with such gentle concern. Darling, what's wrong? You look ill. And he'd guided her to a chair, called for water, summoned a doctor despite her protests, made such a performance of worry that by the time Dr. Pemberton arrived, Vivian had convinced herself she'd overreacted. Hormones, probably. Pregnancy made women emotional, irrational. Everyone said so. Adrian had never mentioned the letter, neither had she, but she'd started watching, noticing. The way he disappeared during parties, the subtle glances he exchanged with certain women, the nights he came home late, smelling of perfume that wasn't hers, the gradual way he'd isolated her, first from her family, they're so demanding of your time, darling, and you need rest, then from friends, those girls are such a bad influence. Until her entire world had narrowed to this estate, these parties, these people who smiled at her and whispered behind her back. Duchess? Vivian startled. A young woman stood beside her, pretty in a common sort of way, wearing a servant's uniform. I'm sorry to disturb you, ma'am. The Duke asked me to bring you this. She held out a folded note on a silver tray. Thank you. Vivian took the paper. The servant disappeared into the crowd. The note was brief, written in Adrian's sharp handwriting, gone to the library. Estate matters. Don't wait up. She read it twice. Estate matters. At his own ball. While she stood here, 7 months pregnant, playing the perfect Duchess for a room full of people who probably knew more about her husband's activities than she did. Something hard and cold settled in Vivian's chest. She looked across the ballroom. Adrian was nowhere in sight. Lord Ashford and his group had dispersed. The music played on, couples spun across the floor, champagne flowed like water. Everything beautiful and hollow. Vivian folded the note carefully and tucked it into the small silk purse dangling from her wrist. Then she started walking. Not toward the main doors where servants would ask if she needed an escort. Not toward the stairs that led to the private chambers where she was supposed to rest like a good, obedient wife. Toward the east corridor where the library was located, where Adrian had supposedly gone to conduct estate business in the middle of a ball he'd insisted they host. Her shoes clicked against marble. The sounds of the party faded behind her. Vivian's heart was pounding in a way that had nothing to do with pregnancy or exertion. She told herself she was being paranoid, hormonal, irrational. She kept walking. The east corridor was dimly lit, lined with portraits of dead blackthorns who stared down with judgment frozen in oil paint. The library door was ahead, ornate oak with bronze handles, currently closed. Vivian reached for the handle. Voices. She froze, hand extended, barely breathing. Tiresome tonight. A woman's voice, cultured, amused, not a servant. She's waddling around like a prized cow. Do you really have to keep up this charade much longer? just until the child is born. Adrian, definitely Adrian. Dr. Pemberton says another 2 months at most. 2 months, the woman laughed, low and intimate. I'm not sure I can bear watching you play the devoted husband for 2 more months. It's almost convincing. That's the point, Lydia. Lydia. Vivian's hand dropped to her side. And after? The woman, Lydia, spoke again. You've promised me so many things, darling. I want details. After the child is born, we move to phase 2. Adrian's voice was casual, discussing plans for her life the way someone might discuss renovating a drawing room. I'll have her declared mentally unstable. It won't be difficult. She's already showing signs. Emotional, irrational, isolated herself from family and friends. Dr. Pemberton will testify it's postpartum melancholia. Very tragic, very common. And then? Then she'll be quietly transferred to a private facility. Somewhere comfortable, discreet. She'll live out her days in peace, properly cared for. A pause. No scandal, no divorce, no messy legal battles over the estate. Everything stays intact. Vivian's knees went weak. She pressed her back against the wall beside the door, one hand covering her mouth to keep from making a sound. You'll still be married to her, Lydia said. She didn't sound pleased. In name only. She'll be incapacitated, legally incompetent. I'll have full control of her dowry, her family holdings, everything. And you, my darling, will have me. The smile in Adrian's voice was audible. We can't marry, obviously, but you'll be my acknowledged companion. Live here, hostess of the estate. Everything but the title. Everything but the title. Lydia's voice had gone flat. It's the best option, love. Surely you see that. What I see is that you're asking me to be your whore while your insane wife rots in an asylum. Don't be crude, Adrian sounded genuinely offended. You'll have status, wealth, freedom, more than most wives have, and we'll be together. Isn't that what matters? Silence. Then, when you put it that way, I suppose it's almost romantic. They laughed together. Vivian couldn't breathe. The corridor was spinning, marble walls tilting at impossible angles. Her chest felt crushed, as if someone had laced her corset too tight. But it wasn't the corset. It was the weight of understanding. This wasn't a recent betrayal. This wasn't a moment of weakness, a mistake, something that could be forgiven and forgotten. This was a plan. Adrian had married her for her money, her connections, her family's influence. He'd gotten her pregnant to secure his heir. And now that she'd served her purpose, he was going to erase her, lock her away, take everything she'd brought to the marriage, and install his mistress in her place. And it wasn't just Adrian. Does Wickham still have his doubts? Lydia asked. Wickham will fall in line once it's done. He knows which side his bread is buttered on. What about the others? Ashford seemed skeptical last week. Ashford needs the loan I'm extending him. He'll keep quiet. Adrian sounded bored now. Darling, I promise you, everything is arranged. Half the peerage already suspects Vivian is unstable. They've seen her isolation, her anxiety, the way she jumps at shadows. When the announcement comes, it won't be a surprise. It'll be a sad inevitability. You're very thorough. I have to be. The Blackthorn estate is everything. I won't lose it to sentimentality. Something rustled. Fabric, maybe. Movement. Come here, Adrian murmured. Someone might see. Let them. We own this room. We own this house. His voice dropped lower. Soon we'll own everything. Vivian didn't wait to hear more. She pushed away from the wall, turned, and walked. Not ran. Running would draw attention, and servants were everywhere. She walked with the same measured grace she'd been taught since childhood, head high, hands folded over her belly, every inch the perfect Duchess. Inside, she was screaming. The ballroom had grown more crowded. More guests had arrived, fashionably late, adding to the crush of silk and jewels and false laughter. Vivian moved through them like a ghost, seeing everything with horrible clarity. There was Lord Wickham, the one who had doubts. He met her eyes across the room and immediately looked away, guilt written across his florid face. There was Lady Ashford, whispering behind her fan to another woman. Both of them glanced at Vivian, then quickly away. There was Baron Hartley, who'd loaned Adrian money last year, who'd been so friendly at dinner parties. He raised his glass to her in a toast that felt like mockery. They knew. Some of them knew, at least. Maybe not the details, but enough. enough to be complicit in their silence. The room tilted again. Vivian grabbed the edge of a table, steadying herself. Duchess, are you unwell? A servant, young and concerned, Vivian couldn't remember his name. I'm fine. The lie came automatically. Just tired. Shall I fetch the Duke? No? Too sharp, she softened her tone. No, thank you. I'm just going to step outside for some air. She didn't wait for a response. She headed toward the terrace doors, aware of eyes tracking her movement, whispers following like silk dragging across stone. The night air hit her face, cool and sharp. The terrace was empty, thank God. Vivian gripped the stone balustrade and tried to remember how to breathe. 2 months. In 2 months, she would give birth to her son, her child, the heir Adrian needed, and then she would disappear. Declared insane, locked away, stripped of her name and rights and freedom. Her family wouldn't intervene. Adrian had already isolated her from them so thoroughly that any protest would look like she was turning on her own husband, proving his claims of instability. Her friends were gone. The society that had welcomed her as a duchess would shake their heads sadly and move on. Poor Vivian Blackthorne, such a tragedy. But these things happen, especially after childbirth. At least the child will be well cared for. Her child. Adrian would raise their son, teach him to be exactly like his father, charming, ruthless, perfectly willing to use people and discard them when they were no longer useful. And Lydia Voss, the mistress who'd mocked Vivian as a prized cow, would be there, playing mother to her child, living in her house, wearing her jewels, probably. Everything but the title. Vivian's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the cold stone. She could leave. Right now. Walk out of this ballroom, get in a carriage, disappear into the night before Adrian's plan came to fruition. And go where? Her family's estate was 2 days' journey away, and she was 7 months pregnant. Adrian would simply retrieve her, doctor's orders in hand, concerned husband protecting his unstable wife from herself. She'd look hysterical, irrational, exactly what he needed to make his case. She could go to the authorities. With what proof? A letter she'd put back in the drawer months ago? An overheard conversation that she, as an emotional pregnant woman, might have misunderstood? Adrian would deny everything. Lydia would disappear. The men who knew would close ranks, and Vivian would still end up locked away, only faster. She had no money of her own. Everything was controlled by Adrian as her husband. No property that wasn't tied to the marriage. No friends who weren't also Adrian's friends first. No allies in a society that valued stability and discretion above justice. She had nothing, except 2 months. Vivian straightened slowly. 2 months before the child was born. 2 months before Adrian's plan moved to its final phase. 2 months to stop being the perfect, compliant duchess he expected. 2 months to become something else entirely. She turned back toward the ballroom. Through the glass doors, she could see the party continuing. Music, dancing, champagne, lies wrapped in silk. Beautiful people living beautiful lies. Adrian had just emerged from the east corridor. He was adjusting his cuffs, smoothing his hair, the picture of aristocratic composure. A moment later, a woman followed. Tall, striking, with auburn hair and a dress cut low enough to be daring but expensive enough to be respectable. Lydia Voss. Vivian watched them separate smoothly, Adrian heading toward Lord Ashford's group, Lydia gliding toward the refreshment table. Professional. Practiced. They'd done this before, many times, right under her nose. The rage that filled Vivian then was clean and cold and clarifying. Adrian thought she was weak, easily controlled, too sheltered and naive to fight back. He'd spent 3 years making sure she was exactly that. But he'd made a mistake. He'd underestimated what a woman would do for her child. Vivian walked back into the ballroom. She caught a servant's eye. "Champagne, please." "Ma'am, are you sure? In your condition, 1 glass won't hurt." She took the flute from the tray and raised it to her lips without drinking. Just the appearance of drinking. Just another pregnant duchess. A little reckless. A little emotional. A little unstable. She could play that role. She'd been playing roles her entire life. Adrian glanced over from his conversation and frowned slightly, seeing the champagne. Vivian smiled at him, the same vacant, obedient smile she'd perfected. His frown smoothed. He turned back to Lord Ashford. Vivian set down the glass and started moving through the crowd with purpose. She spent the next hour talking to people. Not everyone, just specific ones. Lady Pemberton, the doctor's wife, who loved gossip more than breathing. Vivian mentioned casually that she'd been feeling wonderful lately. Absolutely wonderful. No anxiety at all. Perhaps Dr. Pemberton had been too cautious with his concerns.
Lord Hartley, who owed Adrian money. Vivian asked sweetly if he'd managed to review those estate documents Adrian had mentioned, the ones about her dowry properties. She'd love to understand the details better. Hartley had gone pale and excused himself.
Mrs. Wickham, the Baron's wife. Vivian complimented her dress, her jewels, asked about her children. Normal conversation. Except she made sure to mention that she'd been thinking about visiting her family soon. Just for a few weeks. To reconnect. Small things. Calculated things. Planting seeds. At midnight, Vivian pleaded exhaustion and retreated to her chambers. Adrian barely noticed. He was deep in conversation with Lydia by then, the two of them standing just close enough to be improper if anyone cared to notice. Vivian climbed the stairs slowly, one hand on the railing, the other on her belly. Her son was kicking tonight, restless. She pressed her palm against the movement. "I know," she whispered. "Everything's wrong, isn't it?" Another kick. "Don't worry." Vivian reached her door, paused with her hand on the handle. "Mother's going to fix this." Inside her chambers, she locked the door, drew the curtains, lit a single lamp. Then she went to her writing desk, pulled out paper and pen, and started making lists. Everything she knew about Adrian's finances, his debts, his investments, the properties that had come from her dowry versus those that were originally Blackthorn holdings, the men he owed money to, the men who owed him. Everything she remembered from 3 years of marriage to a man who'd thought she wasn't paying attention. The list grew longer. Outside, the ball continued. Music drifted up through the floors. Laughter. The sounds of people having a wonderful time. Vivian wrote until her hand cramped, until the first gray light of dawn started seeping through the curtains. Then she hid the papers in a hat box at the back of her wardrobe, behind winter clothes she wouldn't need for months. She climbed into bed, still wearing her silver silk gown, too exhausted to call for a maid, too wired to sleep. Her son was quiet now, resting. Vivian pressed both hands to her belly and stared at the canopy above her bed. 2 months, she whispered to the darkness. 2 months to gather evidence, build alliances, find weaknesses in Adrian's perfect plan. 2 months to stop being a victim. 2 months to become dangerous. The chandelier that had cost more than a small village glittered in the ballroom below, beautiful and cold and sharp enough to cut. Just like everything else in this house. Just like Vivian was about to become. The morning came too soon, and not soon enough. Vivian woke to sunlight cutting through gaps in the curtains, and her maid Clara, hovering beside the bed, with a concerned expression that had become permanent in recent months. "Your Grace, you slept in your gown. Are you unwell? Shall I send for Dr. Pemberton?" "No." Vivian pushed herself upright, feeling the weight of the baby shift. Her back screamed in protest. "Just tired. Help me out of this thing." Clara's fingers worked at the laces, while Vivian stared at the wall and tried to organize her thoughts into something resembling a plan. The lists she'd written last night were hidden, but they were just words on paper. She needed something concrete, something that couldn't be dismissed as the paranoid fantasies of an emotional pregnant woman. "The Duke asked after you this morning," Clara said, carefully neutral. "He seemed concerned that you retired so early. I'm sure he was devastated." Vivian stepped out of the crumpled silk. "What time is it?" "Nearly 11, Your Grace." 11. She'd slept through breakfast, through the morning callers who always descended after a ball to dissect every detail. Adrian would have handled them alone, playing the devoted husband whose poor wife needed her rest. "Draw me a bath. Then I'll need the blue day dress, the simple one." Clara hesitated. "The Duke requested you wear the green silk today. There are guests for lunch." "The blue dress, Clara." Another hesitation, longer this time. Clara had been with Vivian since the wedding, a gift from Adrian's household. Whose loyalty did she serve? "Of course, Your Grace." Vivian lowered herself into the copper tub 20 minutes later and let the hot water ease muscles that felt like they'd been twisted into knots. Her son was active this morning, pressing against her ribs in a way that was uncomfortable but strangely reassuring. At least one thing in her life was real and uncomplicated. She was toweling off when she heard voices in the bedroom, male voices. Can't simply barge into the Duchess's chambers. I'm her husband, Clara. I don't need permission. Vivian wrapped the towel around herself and opened the door. Adrian stood in the middle of her bedroom, immaculate in a charcoal suit, holding a newspaper. Clara hovered near the wardrobe, wringing her hands. Out, Vivian said to the maid. Clara fled. Adrian waited until the door closed. You left the ball without saying goodbye. You were occupied. Vivian crossed to the wardrobe, acutely aware that she was essentially naked under the towel. I didn't want to interrupt. Occupied? His tone was pleasant, curious, the same tone he'd used to discuss the weather. Lord Ashford seemed to require your full attention. She pulled out the blue dress. Along with half the male peerage. Business matters. Adrian set down the newspaper. You wouldn't understand the details. No, I suppose not. Vivian turned her back to him, dropping the towel and stepping into the chemise Clara had laid out. Let him look. Let him remember that she was still here, still his wife, still the mother of his child. What brings you to my chambers at this hour? I wanted to check on you. You seemed distracted last night. Pregnant women are often distracted. She pulled the chemise over her head. All those hormones making us irrational and unstable. Silence. When she turned around, Adrian was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Are you angry with me, Vivian? Should I be? You tell me. He moved closer. You've been different lately. Withdrawn. I worry about you. The concern in his voice sounded genuine. That was the terrifying part. Adrian could make anything sound genuine. 3 years of marriage, and she still couldn't tell when he was lying. I'm fine, she said. Just tired. The baby is getting heavier. Dr. Pemberton says stress isn't good for you in this condition. Adrian reached out, tucked a strand of wet hair behind her ear. The gesture was tender. His eyes were calculating. You need to rest. Let me handle everything else. Everything else like what? The estate. The finances. The social calendar. His hand moved to her cheek. You don't need to worry about any of it. That's my job. Your job is to stay healthy and give me a strong son. There it was. The truth wrapped in velvet. Your job is to be the vessel. Produce the air. Then disappear quietly so I can take everything you brought to this marriage. Vivian covered his hand with hers, pressed it against her face like she found comfort in his touch. You're very good to me. I try. He leaned in, kissed her forehead. Get dressed. We have the Ashfords coming for lunch, and Lady Pemberton wants to discuss the charity auction next month. Apparently you promised to help organize it. Did I? Last night. You don't remember? Adrian's eyebrows rose, concerned. Darling, you're forgetting conversations now. That's not good. The trap was so smooth she almost missed it. Plant the seed that she was forgetful, unreliable. Build the evidence that she was becoming mentally incompetent. I remember, Vivian said quickly. Of course I remember. Lady Pemberton mentioned it. I said I'd think about it. You said you'd be delighted to help. Adrian stepped back. But perhaps you're right. Perhaps it's too much. I'll make your excuses. No. Too sharp again. She softened it with a smile. No, I want to help. You're right. I must have forgotten the details. Pregnancy brain. If you're sure. I'm sure. He studied her for another long moment, then nodded. Good. Lunch is at 1. Don't be late. He left, taking all the air in the room with him. Vivian sank onto the bed, her hands shaking. That entire conversation had been a test, and she wasn't entirely sure she'd passed it. Adrian was watching her now, documenting every forgetful moment, every emotional outburst, every sign that she was unraveling. She had to be more careful. She also had to move faster. Clara returned to help with the dress. Vivian let the girl lace her in silence, then dismissed her and went to the writing desk. She had an hour before lunch. Not enough time, but she'd make it work. The letter she composed was short, carefully worded. Dearest Mother, I hope this letter finds you well. I've been thinking of home lately. Perhaps the pregnancy is making me sentimental. Would it be terribly inconvenient if I came to visit after the baby is born?
I know Adrian prefers I stay close to Blackthorn Estate, but I do miss you and Father terribly. Please write soon. Your loving daughter, Vivian." She sealed it, addressed it, and tucked it into her bodice before she could second-guess herself. Her parents' estate was 2 days away by carriage. They wrote occasionally, polite letters full of nothing important. Adrian always read her correspondence before it was posted, checking for anything that might embarrass the family name. This letter wouldn't be posted through the estate mail. Lunch was exactly as tedious as Vivian expected. Lord and Lady Ashford brought their vapid daughter, Penelope, who giggled at everything Adrian said and treated Vivian with the kind of pitying condescension reserved for invalids and children. Lady Pemberton arrived with her husband, the doctor, who immediately started lecturing Vivian about bed rest and proper nutrition while his wife described the charity auction in excruciating detail. Vivian smiled, nodded, ate tiny portions of food that tasted like sawdust, played the perfect Duchess, and watched. Lord Ashford kept glancing at Adrian with something that looked like nervousness. Lady Pemberton's eyes flickered to Vivian's stomach more often than seemed natural. Dr. Pemberton was asking pointed questions about her mental state. Did she sleep well? Any troubling dreams? Anxiety? Mood swings? They were in on it. Maybe not the wives, but the men definitely knew what was coming. "Vivian?" Adrian's voice cut through her thoughts. "Lady Pemberton asked you a question." "I'm sorry." Vivian blinked, refocusing. "I was distracted. What was the question?" Lady Pemberton's expression was pure sympathy. "I asked if you'd prefer to organize the auction catalog or handle the invitations, dear, though perhaps both tasks are too much in your condition." "The invitations," Vivian said. "I'll handle the invitations." "Are you certain? It's quite a long list." "I'm certain." Adrian's hand found hers under the table, squeezed gently. Warning or threat? With him, it was impossible to tell. The lunch dragged on. More conversation about nothing. More careful observations disguised as concern. By the time the guests finally left, Vivian's face hurt from smiling. "You did well," Adrian said, watching the carriages depart from the drawing room window. "Though Dr. Pemberton thinks you're pushing yourself too hard. Dr. Pemberton thinks I should spend the next 2 months in bed, staring at the ceiling." "Perhaps he's right." Adrian turned to face her. "You looked very pale during lunch, and you forgot Lady Pemberton's question. That's twice today you've been forgetful." "I was thinking about something else." "What?" The question came too quickly, too sharply. Vivian met his eyes and lied without hesitation. "Baby names. I know we've discussed it, but I keep changing my mind." Adrian's expression relaxed. "We agreed on Edward if it's a boy. After my grandfather." "I know, but I was thinking perhaps something for my family. Edward," his voice had gone cold. "The Blackthorn heir carries a Blackthorn name." "Of course." Vivian lowered her eyes, submissive. "You're right. Edward is perfect." She could feel him studying her, waiting for an argument that didn't come. When she finally looked up, he was smiling again. "I need to handle some business in town," he said. "I'll be back for dinner. Rest this afternoon. Doctor's orders." He kissed her cheek and left. Vivian waited until she heard his horse on the gravel drive. Then she moved. The letter was still tucked in her bodice. She pulled it out, along with the second one she'd written while Clara was fetching her shoes. This one was addressed to her childhood friend Margaret, who'd married a lawyer in London and maintained connections that Vivian desperately needed. She couldn't mail them from the estate. Adrian controlled the post, but the village was a 15-minute walk through the gardens and out the back gate that the servants used for deliveries. 15 minutes there. 5 minutes to post the letters at the public office. 15 minutes back. She could make it. She shouldn't make it. Dr. Pemberton had been very clear about limited exertion. Walking that distance in her condition was foolish at best, dangerous at worst. But sitting here waiting for Adrian to erase her was worse. Vivian changed into a simpler dress, grabbed a shawl, and headed for the servants' entrance. She passed 2 maids who curtsied quickly and didn't question where the Duchess was going. Down the back stairs, through the kitchen where cook was yelling at a scullery boy about burnt bread, out into the afternoon sunlight. The gardens were beautiful this time of year. Roses in full bloom, fountains trickling, gravel paths winding through carefully manicured hedges. Vivian had spent hours here in the early days of her marriage, trying to find peace and beauty. Now it just looked like a very expensive cage. The walk was harder than she'd anticipated. Her back ached within 5 minutes. By 10, she was breathing heavily, one hand pressed to her side where a stitch was forming. The baby was pressing on something uncomfortable, making every step feel like she was being stabbed from the inside. She kept walking. The village of Thornwood was small, provincial, entirely dependent on the estate for its economy. Every shop, every house, every cobblestone street existed because some Blackthorn ancestor had decided to build here. The people were polite to Vivian when she appeared, but distant. She was the Duchess, not a person. Part of the estate, like the furniture. The postal office was tucked between a bakery and a general store. Vivian pushed open the door, breathing hard, sweat dampening her collar despite the shawl. The clerk behind the counter looked up and immediately straightened. "Your Grace, we weren't expecting. Is everything all right? Should I send for the Duke?" "Everything's fine." Vivian placed the letters on the counter. "I need these posted, today, if possible." The clerk picked them up, noting the addresses. "Of course, Your Grace, though the Duke usually handles the estate correspondence. These are personal." Vivian met his eyes. "Is that a problem?" "No, Your Grace, not at all." But his expression said otherwise. He was already calculating whether this was something he should mention to Adrian. "That'll be 4 pence." Vivian realized with a sinking feeling that she had no money. She hadn't needed money in 3 years. Everything was paid through the estate accounts. "Put it on the estate tab," she said, trying to sound authoritative. "The Duke prefers to settle accounts personally." "The Duke is my husband. I'm sure he'll approve a 4 pence expense for his wife's correspondence." Her voice came out sharper than intended. The clerk flinched. "Of course, Your Grace. My apologies." He stamped the letters and set them aside. Vivian watched him do it, trying to memorize which pile they went into, whether they'd actually be posted or whether they'd mysteriously find their way to Adrian's desk first. "Thank you." She turned to leave. "Your Grace?" The clerk's voice stopped her. "Forgive me, but you look unwell. Shall I call for the estate carriage?" "I'm fine. It's just, you walked here in your condition?" Small village. Everyone knew everyone's business. By dinner, half of Thornwood would know the Duchess had walked to town alone, looking ill, to post mysterious letters. By tomorrow morning, Adrian would know. "I needed the exercise," Vivian said firmly. "Fresh air. Dr. Pemberton recommended it." The lie came smoothly. The clerk's expression cleared. "Of course, Your Grace. Good for the baby. Fresh air." Vivian fled before he could ask any more questions. The walk back was agony. The stitch in her side had become a constant stabbing pain. Her legs were shaking. The baby was kicking frantically, disturbed by the exertion. Halfway through the gardens, Vivian had to stop and lean against a fountain, breathing through waves of dizziness. This was stupid, reckless. Exactly the kind of behavior that would support Adrian's claims that she was becoming unstable. But the letters were posted. That was something. She made it back to the servants' entrance and nearly collapsed on the stairs. A footman appeared out of nowhere, grabbing her arm. "Your Grace, are you hurt? Should I fetch the doctor?" "No, doctor." The last thing she needed was Dr. Pemberton documenting this episode. "I just need to rest. Help me to my chambers." The footman half carried her up the stairs. By the time they reached her room, Clara was already there, eyes wide with alarm. "What happened?" "She walked to the village," the footman said. "Posted letters." Clara's face went white. "I'll inform the Duke immediately." "No." Vivian grabbed Clara's wrist. "You will not inform the Duke of anything. I went for a walk. I'm allowed to walk." "In your condition?" "Clara." Vivian's voice dropped to a whisper. "Please, I just need to rest. Don't tell him. Please." Clara looked torn between duty and compassion. Finally, she nodded. "I won't say anything, but you need to lie down. Your face is gray." Vivian let herself be guided to the bed. Clara unlaced the dress with shaking fingers, helped her into a nightgown, pulled the curtains closed. "I'll bring tea," Clara murmured, "and I'll tell the staff you're resting. No one will disturb you." "Thank you." Clara hesitated at the door. "Your Grace? Whatever you're doing, be careful." The door closed softly. Vivian lay in the darkness, one hand on her belly, and tried to slow her racing heart.
The baby had stopped kicking, settled into stillness that was somehow more frightening than the frantic movement earlier. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. I'm trying to protect you. I'm just not very good at this." No response. No kicks. Just silence. Panic clawed at her throat. She pressed harder against her stomach, willing the baby to move, to do something, to prove he was still... A kick. Small. Annoyed. Clearly communicating that he didn't appreciate being poked. Vivian burst into tears. She cried silently into her pillow, shoulders shaking, trying not to make any sound that would bring Clara running. Cried because she was terrified and exhausted and completely out of her depth. Cried because she'd just risked her baby's health to mail 2 letters that might never even reach their destinations. Cried because she was 22 years old and pregnant and trapped in a house with a man who wanted to erase her, and she had no idea how to fight back. The crying jag lasted maybe 5 minutes. Then Vivian wiped her face, sat up, and got angry instead. Anger was better. Anger was useful. She'd posted the letters. That was step 1. Now she needed step 2. The hat box in the wardrobe held her lists. Vivian pulled them out and spread them across the bed, studying what she'd written by candlelight. Adrian's finances were complicated. Most of the Blackthorn wealth was tied up in properties, investments, loans to other nobles who were equally broke but too proud to admit it. The estate itself was profitable. Tenant farms, timber rights, mining leases. But Adrian lived well beyond those profits. He was drowning in debt, had been since before their marriage. Her dowry had saved him, temporarily. The properties she'd brought to the marriage, 3 estates from her family, plus the income from several trust funds, were legally Adrian's to control as her husband. But the original deeds were still in her family's name. If she could prove he'd married her under false pretenses, intentionally deceived her about his financial situation, that was fraud. Even among the aristocracy, fraud had consequences. But she needed proof, documentation, something more substantial than her own suspicions. Vivian added to her lists names of banks, lawyers who handled the estate accounts, property managers, anyone who might have records she could access. She was still writing when Clara returned with tea and toast. "You should eat, Your Grace." "I'm not hungry." "You need to keep your strength up." Clara set the tray down, glanced at the papers spread across the bed. "What are you working on?" "Nothing important." Vivian started gathering the lists. "Your Grace," Clara's voice was quiet. "I've been with you since the wedding. I'm not blind." Vivian froze. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I know something is wrong. I've known for months." Clara picked up a teacup, poured carefully. "The Duke has been different lately, colder, and there's been talk among the staff." "What kind of talk?" Clara hesitated, then, "There's a woman. She visits sometimes when you're resting, comes to the library through the garden entrance, stays for hours." The air left Vivian's lungs. "How long has this been happening?" 6 months, maybe longer. I didn't want to worry you, especially not in your condition. Who knows about this? Most of the household staff? We've been instructed not to mention it to you. The Duke said you were fragile, that any stress might harm the baby. Fragile, unstable, unreliable. Adrian had been building his case for months right under her nose, using the very people employed to serve her. "Clara!" Vivian's voice was steady despite the rage burning through her. "Whose side are you on?" Clara met her eyes. "I serve you, Your Grace. Not the Duke. You." "Then I need your help." "With what?" "I need to know everything. Every time this woman visits, every conversation you overhear, every detail about what's happening in this house when I'm not present." Vivian reached for Clara's hand. "And I need you to not tell anyone what I'm doing. Not the other servants, not the Duke, no one." Clara's fingers tightened around hers. "You're scaring me." "Good. You should be scared. I'm terrified." Vivian's laugh came out bitter. "But I'm also done being the obedient wife who doesn't ask questions. Will you help me?" For a long moment, Clara said nothing. Then she nodded. "What do you need?" They talked for an hour. Clara described the woman. Auburn hair, expensive clothes, arrived in a private carriage with no crest. She usually came on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. The Duke always made sure Vivian was resting during those visits. The staff had standing orders to keep the East Wing clear. "The library," Vivian said. "They meet in the library." Yes, Your Grace. And Dr. Pemberton? Has he been part of these meetings?
Clara bit her lip. Once or twice, and he's been asking the staff questions about your behavior, your moods, whether you seem confused or forgetful. He's documenting everything. Vivian's hands clenched into fists, building a medical case that I'm mentally incompetent. For what purpose?
Vivian almost told her, almost explained the entire horrible plan she'd overheard. But Clara was young, naive, loyal, exactly the kind of person who might accidentally reveal something to the wrong person out of concern. I'm not sure yet, Vivian lied, but I intend to find out. Clara left with instructions to pay close attention to anything unusual and report back daily. Vivian returned to her lists, adding new information, new potential allies. The servants knew about Lydia. That was leverage. Dr. Pemberton was actively building a medical case against her. That was a problem. Her family hadn't heard from her in months. That was both a problem and an opportunity. Vivian was still working when she heard hoofbeats on the gravel drive. She shoved the papers back into the hat box and buried it in the wardrobe just as Adrian's voice echoed from downstairs. "Where's my wife?" Vivian smoothed her nightgown, climbed back into bed, and arranged herself to look like she'd been sleeping. Footsteps on the stairs. Her door opened without a knock. Adrian stood in the doorway, his expression thunderous. "The postal clerk sent word," he said quietly. "You went to the village today. I needed fresh air. You walked. Alone. In your condition." He moved closer. "Are you trying to lose this baby?" "Of course not." "Then what were you thinking?" His voice was still controlled, but something dangerous flickered beneath it. Dr. Pemberton specifically said bed rest, limited exertion, and you decide to take a stroll through the village to mail secret letters? They weren't secret. They were to my mother and Margaret. About what? Vivian met his eyes. About wanting to visit after the baby is born. Is that forbidden? Adrian's jaw tightened. You should have discussed it with me first. Why? Do I need permission to write to my own mother? You need to think about what's best for this family. He sat on the edge of the bed, took her hand in a grip that looked gentle and felt like a vice. Vivian, I'm worried about you. This behavior, sneaking off to mail letters, forgetting conversations, emotional outbursts, it's not like you. Maybe you don't know me as well as you think. The words came out before she could stop them. Adrian went very still. What did you say? Vivian's heart was pounding. She'd pushed too hard, revealed too much, but she was so tired of being careful, being perfect, being the compliant Duchess he expected. Nothing, she said. I'm just exhausted. Adrian studied her for a long moment. Then he released her hand and stood. Dr. Pemberton will examine you tomorrow, he said, to make sure today's exertion didn't cause any harm, and from now on you don't leave the estate without me, for your own safety. That's not necessary. It's not a request, Vivian, it's a fact. He moved to the door, paused. I'm doing this because I love you. I hope you understand that. The door closed. A key turned in the lock. Vivian sat frozen, staring at the locked door, understanding flooding through her. She was a prisoner now. No more walks to the village. No more unsupervised correspondence. Adrian had escalated, dropped the pretense of the concerned husband and moved straight to containment because she'd scared him. Her walking to the village, mailing those letters, it had been unpredictable, outside his control. And Adrian needed control, which meant she was making progress. Vivian waited until his footsteps faded down the hallway. Then she crossed to the door and tested the handle. Locked, as expected, but the balcony doors were still accessible. She pushed them open and stepped out into the cool evening air. Her chambers were on the second floor, overlooking the gardens. A 20-foot drop to the ground. Impossible to climb down, especially pregnant, but there was a trellis covered in climbing roses 3 feet to the left, and the room next to hers was the old nursery, currently unused, possibly unlocked. Vivian studied the distance, the angle, what it would take to reach that trellis. Then she went back inside and started making new plans. Adrian wanted to keep her contained. Fine. She'd show him exactly how dangerous a desperate woman could be. 3 days passed before Vivian made her move. 3 days of playing the perfect prisoner, compliant during Dr. Pemberton's examination, docile when Adrian checked on her twice daily, grateful when Clara brought meals on a tray. She didn't protest the locked door, didn't ask to leave her chambers, just smiled weakly and touched her belly and acted exactly like a woman whose spirit was breaking. Adrian relaxed by the second day. By the third, he'd stopped locking the door during daylight hours, confident she'd learned her lesson. He was wrong. Tuesday afternoon arrived with rain clouds and the sound of carriage wheels on gravel. Vivian watched from her window as the unmarked coach pulled up to the garden entrance, the one servants used for deliveries, the one that couldn't be seen from the main house. Lydia Voss stepped out in a burgundy dress that probably cost more than Clara made in a year. Vivian waited until Lydia disappeared through the garden door. Then she moved. The hallway outside her chambers was empty. Most of the staff would be occupied with afternoon duties, laundry, kitchen work, preparing for dinner. Vivian slipped down the corridor toward the east wing, moving as quickly as her swollen belly allowed. Every footstep felt too loud against the hardwood floors. The library door was closed. Voices filtered through, Adrian's low murmur, Lydia's laugh. Vivian pressed herself against the wall beside the door, listening. "Can't keep doing this," Lydia was saying. "It's been 4 months since you promised me a timeline. I'm getting impatient." "The baby hasn't arrived yet." Adrian sounded annoyed. "We discussed this. Nothing happens until after the birth. And then what? You sign some papers and she disappears to an asylum? It seems too easy." "It won't be easy. It'll be carefully orchestrated." A pause. Dr. Pemberton has been documenting her deteriorating mental state, the forgetfulness, the paranoia, the reckless behavior. When the time comes, we'll have everything we need. "What if she fights it?" Adrian laughed. "With what? She has no money, no allies, no legal standing. Her family hasn't heard from her in months. When I tell them she's had a breakdown, they'll believe it. Everyone will believe it because everyone's been watching it happen." Vivian's fingernails bit into her palms. "You're very thorough," Lydia said. "It's almost frightening." "I protect what's mine. And once she's gone, what about us? We'll be together. Discreetly, of course. You'll live here, hostess the parties, manage the household. Everything a duchess does except the title. I want the title." "Lydia," Adrian's voice hardened. "We've discussed this. I can't divorce a mentally incompetent wife. The scandal would destroy everything. This way I keep the estate, the money, the respectability. You keep me. It's the best option for everyone." "Best for you, you mean? Best for us." Movement inside. Footsteps approaching the door. Vivian turned and ran. She made it back to her chambers seconds before she heard Adrian's door open. Her heart was hammering so hard she thought it might crack a rib. The baby kicked frantically, disturbed by her racing pulse. "I know," Vivian whispered, pressing both hands to her stomach. "I know. I'm sorry." She couldn't keep doing this, sneaking around, eavesdropping, collecting information that she had no idea how to use. She needed help, real help, the kind that came with legal power and social standing. She needed her family. But Adrian controlled all communication with the outside world. Her letters had been posted 5 days ago, and she had no way of knowing if they'd actually been delivered or if they'd been intercepted. She was trapped in this house, in this marriage, in this body that grew heavier and more unwieldy every day. Unless she could get out. The thought crystallized into a plan so quickly it felt like someone else had put it there. The old nursery next door. The trellis outside. A 20-foot drop that would be suicide for a pregnant woman in broad daylight. But at night, when everyone was asleep, when Adrian was locked in his own chambers with whatever bottle of brandy he'd been favoring lately, it was insane. It was also her only option. Vivian spent the rest of the afternoon preparing. She pulled out her simplest dress. No corset, no layers of petticoats, just dark wool that would blend into shadows. Found a shawl that could double as rope if needed. Counted the money in her jewelry box, the few coins Adrian hadn't bothered to confiscate because he'd never imagined she'd need them. 2 pounds, 3 shillings. Enough for a coach to her parents' estate if she could make it to the village. Clara arrived with dinner, roasted chicken that Vivian couldn't have choked down if her life depended on it. "You're not eating," Clara observed. "Not hungry." "You need to eat. The baby needs—" "Clara," Vivian set down her fork. "If something happens to me, if I'm not here tomorrow morning, I need you to get a message to my mother, Lady Catherine Hale, Rosewood Manor, 2 days north. Can you do that? Clara's face went white. Your Grace, what are you planning? Can you do it? You're frightening me. Can you do it? Yes or no? Clara swallowed hard. Yes, but then that's all I need. Vivian stood, crossed to the writing desk, scribbled an address on a piece of paper. If I'm gone, send word immediately. Don't wait for the Duke's permission. Don't tell him you're doing it. Just send the message. Where are you going? I don't know yet. The lie came easily now. Somewhere safe. Clara looked like she wanted to argue. Instead, she just nodded and tucked the paper into her apron. Be careful. I'm past careful. Careful got me locked in my own bedroom. After Clara left, Vivian lay down fully clothed and waited for the house to settle into sleep. Hours crawled by. Outside her window, the rain that had threatened all day finally arrived, turning the gardens into a watercolor blur. Perfect. Rain would mask sound, keep the household inside, make it less likely anyone would notice a figure climbing down a trellis in the dark. It would also make the trellis slippery and treacherous. Vivian pushed that thought away. At midnight, she heard Adrian's footsteps pass her door. His chambers were 3 rooms down the hall. She waited another hour, listening to the house creak and settle before she moved. The balcony doors opened silently. She'd oiled the hinges that afternoon with lamp oil. Rain hit her face immediately, cold and shocking. The wind had picked up, whipping her dress around her legs. The trellis was exactly where she remembered it, 3 feet to the left, covered in roses that looked beautiful in daylight and deadly at night. Thorns gleamed in the faint moonlight that broke through clouds. Vivian studied the gap between her balcony and the trellis. 3 feet, maybe 4. An easy step for someone who wasn't 7 months pregnant. For her, it might as well have been a chasm. She could go back inside. Forget this whole stupid, reckless plan. Wait for her letters to reach her family, hope they'd intervene before Adrian's timeline clicked into its final phase. Or she could jump. Vivian climbed onto the balcony railing using a pillar for balance. The stone was slick under her hands. Below, the garden stretched out in darkness, 20 feet of empty air between her and broken bones. Don't look down, she whispered. Don't think, just move. She pushed off. For one horrible second, she was suspended in nothing, rain pelting her face, wind tearing at her clothes. Then her hands hit the trellis and she grabbed, fingers closing around wet wood and thorns that immediately bit into her palms. Pain exploded through her hands. The trellis groaned under her weight. Vivian hung there, feet scrabbling for purchase, thorns shredding her skin, trying not to scream. Her belly pressed against the wood, and the baby kicked violently, protesting this insanity. I'm sorry, she gasped. I'm so sorry. Just hold on. Her feet found the crossbar. She adjusted her grip, ignoring the blood running down her wrists, and started climbing down. 1 foot, then the other. Test each bar before trusting her weight to it. Don't rush. Don't fall. Halfway down, a bar snapped. Vivian's right foot plunged through empty air. She threw her weight left, clinging to the trellis with both hands, thorns driving deeper into already torn flesh. The trellis swayed, pulling away from the wall. It was going to collapse. She was going to fall, crash into the garden, break her spine or her skull or her baby's. The trellis held. Barely. It had shifted, leaning at an angle that was definitely not structurally sound, but it held. Vivian didn't breathe, didn't move, just hung there in the rain, counting heartbeats, waiting for the final crack that would send her plummeting. It didn't come. She started climbing again, faster now, reckless, because staying still felt more dangerous than moving. Her hands were numb with cold and pain. Blood made everything slippery. The baby was kicking frantically, terrified or angry or both. 10 feet from the ground, 5 feet. Close enough that falling wouldn't kill her. Vivian let go. She hit the wet grass hard, rolling instinctively to protect her belly, pain shooting through her shoulder and hip. For a moment she just lay there, gasping, rain washing blood from her torn hands. Then she heard it, footsteps on gravel, someone moving through the gardens. Vivian scrambled upright, biting back a cry as her injured shoulder protested. She pressed herself against the wall, hidden in shadow, watching. A figure emerged from the darkness, male, tall, carrying a lantern that swung wildly in the wind. Who's there? The voice was young, uncertain. One of the footmen, probably, doing a security check.
Vivian held her breath. The footman moved closer, lantern raised. Light swept across the gardens, illuminating rain-soaked roses and the damaged trellis still swaying against the wall. "Bloody wind," the footman muttered. He studied the trellis for a moment, then shook his head and moved on, heading toward the stables. Vivian waited until he disappeared. Then she ran. The gardens gave way to the service road that led to the village. Her shoes were soaked through within minutes, her dress plastered to her body, hair hanging in wet ropes. Every step sent pain through her injured shoulder. Her hands were still bleeding, leaving a trail she could only hope the rain would wash away. The village was dark and silent when she reached it. Every shop shuttered, every house locked tight against the storm. No lights anywhere except the public house at the end of the main street. Vivian pushed open the door. Heat and noise hit her like a wall. The pub was crowded despite the late hour. Men drinking, playing cards, escaping their lives for a few hours. Conversation died the moment she appeared. Every eye in the room fixed on the Duchess of Blackthorn, soaking wet, bleeding, very obviously pregnant, standing in a common pub at 1 a.m. "I need a coach," Vivian said into the sudden silence. "To Rosewood Manor, 2 days north. I can pay." Nobody moved. "Please," her voice cracked. "Someone, anyone, I need—" "Your Grace." The innkeeper appeared, wiping his hands on an apron. He was older, weathered, the kind of man who'd seen too much to be easily shocked. "Does the Duke know you're here?" "No." "Does he know you've left the estate?" "Not yet." Vivian pulled the coins from her pocket. Her hands were shaking so badly she nearly dropped them. "I have money. I'll pay double the normal rate. I just need a coach and a driver who won't ask questions." The innkeeper's eyes moved from her face to her belly to her bleeding hands. "You're hurt." "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You look like you crawled through a thorn bush." "I did. Are you going to help me or not?" More silence. The men in the pub were watching with the kind of avid interest usually reserved for street fights. This story would be all over the village by morning. By noon, Adrian would know exactly where she'd gone. She had maybe 12 hours, maybe less. "Please," Vivian said again. "I'm begging you. I need to get to my family." The innkeeper studied her for a long moment. Then he sighed. "Wait here." He disappeared into the back. Vivian stood dripping on the floor, acutely aware of every stare, every whispered comment. Someone laughed, nervous, uncomfortable. Someone else told him to shut up. The innkeeper returned with a blanket and a woman who looked like an older, sterner version of him. "My wife will tend your hands while I ready the coach. But I want it known, Your Grace. I'm doing this because you look desperate, not because I'm taking sides in whatever's happening between you and the Duke." "I understand." "Do you?" His eyes were sharp. "Because when he comes looking for you, and he will come looking, I'm going to tell him exactly what happened here. I won't lie to the Duke of Blackthorn. Not for you, not for anyone." "That's fine." Vivian wrapped the blanket around her shoulders. It smelled like horse and tobacco and safety. "Just get me a coach." The innkeeper's wife led her to a back room and set to work cleaning the torn flesh of her palms. The woman didn't speak, just worked with efficient, painful thoroughness, pulling out thorns with tweezers and binding the wounds with strips of clean cloth. "You're a fool," she finally said. "I know. Running off in your condition, in this weather, you could lose the baby." "I know that too." "Does the Duke beat you?" The question was so unexpected that Vivian actually laughed. "No, nothing so simple." "Then what?" Vivian met the woman's eyes. She was maybe 50, with the kind of face that had weathered hard work and harder choices. The kind of woman who might understand desperate measures. "He's going to take my baby and lock me away," Vivian said quietly. "Declare me insane. Make me disappear. And everyone will believe him because he's the Duke and I'm just the wife who couldn't handle the pressure." The woman's hand stilled. "That's a serious accusation." "It's the truth." "You have proof?" "No, that's why I'm running." Vivian looked down at her bandaged hands. "I'm a fool, like you said, but I'm a fool who refuses to go quietly." The woman finished tying off the bandages and stood. "The coach will be ready in 10 minutes. There's bread and cheese on the table if you're hungry." She left without another word. Vivian wasn't hungry, but she forced herself to eat anyway. The baby needed fuel and she needed strength. The bread tasted like sawdust. She choked it down. True to his word, the innkeeper had a coach ready when she emerged. The driver was young, barely 20, looking nervous about the whole enterprise. "This is my nephew," the innkeeper said. "He'll take you to Rosewood Manor. 3 days if the roads are good, 4 if this rain keeps up." 2 days, Vivian corrected. "I was told it's 2 days from here." "In a private coach with fresh horses at every posting station, maybe. In this?" He gestured to the modest coach pulled by 2 horses that looked tired already. 3 days minimum. 3 days. Adrian would catch her long before that, unless he didn't know which direction she'd gone. "Change of plans," Vivian said. "Take me east, to the coaching inn at Millbrook. From there I can catch the public coach north." The innkeeper frowned. "Millbrook's 6 hours in the opposite direction." "Exactly. If the Duke comes looking, he'll assume I went straight to my family. He won't think to check east first." "Clever," the innkeeper admitted grudgingly. "Or stupid. I haven't decided which." "It can be both." Vivian climbed into the coach, every muscle screaming in protest. "Thank you for everything." "Don't thank me yet. You're not safe until you're with your family." The coach lurched into motion. Vivian pulled the blanket tighter and watched the village disappear into rain and darkness. She'd done it, actually escaped, made it out of the estate, out of Adrian's reach, out of the carefully constructed prison he'd built around her. Now she just had to stay out. The rain continued all night. The coach rocked and swayed over roads that were rapidly turning to mud. Vivian tried to sleep and couldn't, tried to get comfortable and failed. Her shoulder throbbed, her hands hurt. The baby was restless, moving constantly, as if he could sense his mother's fear. Dawn came gray and miserable. Through the coach window, Vivian could see nothing but empty countryside, fields, hedgerows, the occasional farmhouse. No pursuit. No sign that Adrian had discovered her absence yet. But he would. Soon. They stopped once to rest the horses. The driver, whose name was Thomas, she'd learned, brought her water and more bread from the coaching inn they'd paused at. "How much farther to Millbrook?" Vivian asked. "Another 3 hours if the roads hold. Longer if they don't." Thomas glanced at her belly. "Begging your pardon, Your Grace, but should you be traveling in your condition? You look ready to drop that baby any moment." "I have 2 months yet." "My wife looked like you at 6 months." Thomas shook his head. "I don't like this. If something happens, nothing's going to happen." But even as she said it, Vivian felt a cramp low in her belly. Not painful, just there. A tightening that lasted a few seconds and then released. She'd felt them before. Braxton Hicks contractions, Dr. Pemberton had called them. Practice contractions. Normal in late pregnancy. They were supposed to be irregular, sporadic. This was the 3rd one in an hour. Vivian said nothing and climbed back into the coach. Millbrook appeared through the rain like a mirage. A proper town, not just a village. Coaching inns, shops, a market square. People moving through the streets despite the weather, getting on with their lives. The public coach north wasn't scheduled to depart until tomorrow morning. Vivian stood in the coaching inn's common room, trying to decide if she could risk staying here overnight, when another contraction hit. This one hurt. She grabbed the edge of a table, breathing through it, counting seconds until it passed. 20 seconds. Maybe 30. Not Braxton Hicks. Real labor, 2 months early. "No," Vivian whispered. "Not yet. Not now, please. Not now." But her body had apparently decided it was done being pregnant. Done with the running and the fear and the stress. Done carrying a baby that was getting too big, too demanding, taking up too much space. Another contraction, stronger, closer. Vivian looked around the crowded common room and realized with horrible clarity that she was about to give birth in a public coaching inn, 6 hours from anywhere, with no doctor, no midwife, no one who had any idea what to do. And somewhere behind her, Adrian was coming. She could feel it, the certainty that he'd discovered her absence, that he was even now organizing a search, that his rage would be cold and terrible when he found her. If he found her giving birth in a coaching inn, weak and vulnerable and completely at his mercy, "I need a room," Vivian told the innkeeper. "Private, quiet. And I need someone who knows how to deliver a baby." The innkeeper's eyes widened. "Now? Very soon," he shouted for his wife. The next hours blurred into pain and panic. They got her upstairs to a small room that smelled like old wood and candle wax. The innkeeper's wife, Mrs. Shaw, her name was Mrs. Shaw, sent for the local midwife and helped Vivian out of her wet clothes. "When did the pain start?" Mrs. Shaw asked. "This morning, but they were small then." "And now?" Another contraction answered for her. Vivian doubled over, gripping the bedpost, trying not to scream. "Now they're not small," Mrs. Shaw said grimly. "This baby's coming whether we're ready or not." The midwife arrived an hour later, a brisk, no-nonsense woman named Mrs. Kettering, who took one look at Vivian and started barking orders. More hot water, clean linens. Everyone out except her and Mrs. Shaw. "How far along are you?" Mrs. Kettering demanded. 7 months. 7... The midwife's face went pale. "You're sure?" "Very sure." "Then this baby's coming early. Too early. We need a doctor." "There's no time for a doctor," Mrs. Shaw said. "Look at her. She's nearly there." Vivian wanted to argue that she was nowhere near nearly there, that this couldn't be happening, that 2-month premature babies didn't survive, that she couldn't lose this child after everything she'd risked to protect him. Instead, another contraction hit, and she stopped thinking about anything except breathing. The afternoon dissolved into agony, contractions that came faster and harder until there was no break between them, no moment to rest or prepare. Mrs. Kettering coached her through each one. Breathe, push, rest, breathe again. Mrs. Shaw held her hand and didn't complain when Vivian's grip turned crushing. And then, as the sun was setting somewhere beyond the rain clouds, Vivian felt something shift. "He's coming," Mrs. Kettering said. "Next contraction, you push with everything you have." Vivian pushed. The pain was inhuman, transcendent, like being torn in half from the inside out. She heard herself screaming and couldn't stop, didn't care who heard, just needed it to end, needed this to be over. "One more," Mrs. Kettering urged. "Come on, Your Grace, one more good push." Vivian bore down with strength she didn't know she had, and suddenly the pressure released. The pain didn't stop, but it changed, became something bearable. A thin, reedy cry filled the room. "It's a boy," Mrs. Kettering said. Vivian collapsed back against the pillows, shaking, sobbing, exhausted beyond anything she'd ever experienced. "Is he alive? Is he breathing?" "He's breathing. Small, but breathing." The midwife wrapped the baby in a blanket. "Born too soon, though. He'll need careful watching." "Let me see him." Mrs. Kettering placed the bundle in Vivian's arms. He was tiny. Impossibly tiny. His skin was red and wrinkled, his eyes squeezed shut, fists waving angrily at being forced from warmth into this cold, bright world. He looked furious and fragile and perfect. "Hello," Vivian whispered. "Hello, little one. I'm your mother, and I'm going to keep you safe. I promise." The baby's crying quieted. His tiny hand wrapped around her finger. Vivian looked up at Mrs. Kettering. "How long before I can travel?" The midwife's eyebrows shot up. "Travel? Your Grace, you just gave birth 2 months early. You can't travel for weeks. Maybe months." "I don't have weeks." Vivian tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Everything hurt. "My husband doesn't know where I am yet, but he will soon. And when he finds me, then we'll deal with him when he arrives," Mrs. Shaw said firmly. "Right now you need rest and that baby needs warmth. Nothing else matters." But everything else mattered. Vivian had run from Blackthorn Estate to protect her son. Now he was here, real and vulnerable and completely dependent on her. And she was trapped in a coaching inn, bleeding and weak, unable to run any farther. If Adrian found them now, she had nothing left to fight with. The baby made a small sound against her chest. Vivian looked down at his tiny, scrunched face and felt something fierce and feral take root in her chest. Let Adrian come. Let him try to take this child from her. She'd climbed down a trellis in the rain, torn her hands to shreds, and given birth 2 months early in a stranger's coaching inn. If he thought that made her weak, he was about to learn exactly how wrong he was. The door downstairs slammed open. Male voices echoed up from the common room, loud, authoritative, demanding. Mrs. Shaw's face went white. "That'll be the Duke." Vivian's arms tightened around her son. "Tell him I'm not here," she said. "Your Grace, tell him I died in childbirth. Tell him the baby died too. Tell him whatever you have to, but don't let him up here." Footsteps on the stairs, heavy, determined, coming closer, coming closer.
Mrs. Shaw moved toward the door, but Vivian grabbed her wrist with her free hand, the one not cradling her son. "Wait." The footsteps reached the landing, paused. Then Adrian's voice, cold and precise. "Where is my wife?" Mrs. Kettering stepped into the hallway, pulling the door mostly closed behind her. Vivian could see her silhouette through the gap, blocking the entrance with her body. "Who's asking?" the midwife said.
"The Duke of Blackthorn. And you know exactly who I'm asking about. There's a woman who gave birth here this evening, but she's very weak, lost a lot of blood, can't be disturbed. I'll determine what she can handle." Adrian's tone brooked no argument. "Step aside." "I will not." Mrs. Kettering's voice was steel. "I've been delivering babies for 30 years, Your Grace, and I don't care if you're the king himself. You don't enter a birthing room without the mother's permission. It's not decent." A pause. Vivian could imagine Adrian's face, that particular expression of cold fury he wore when someone dared contradict him. "The woman in that room is my wife," he said quietly. "The child is my heir. I have every right." "You have the right to wait downstairs until I say she's ready for visitors." Mrs. Kettering didn't budge. "Now go, or I'll have the innkeeper throw you out." The innkeeper's voice drifted up from below. "She's right, Your Grace. My wife sent for Mrs. Kettering, and what she says in matters of childbirth is law in this town. You'll have to wait." Vivian held her breath. The baby stirred against her chest, making small snuffling sounds. "Please don't cry," she thought. "Please don't make a sound." "Fine." Adrian's voice was tight with barely controlled rage. "I'll wait, but not long. 5 minutes, Mrs. Kettering. Then I'm coming in whether you like it or not." Footsteps retreated down the stairs. Mrs. Kettering slipped back into the room and closed the door firmly. Her face was flushed, hands trembling slightly. "He's not a patient man, your husband," she said. "No." Vivian looked down at her son. In the lamplight, his skin looked almost translucent. She could see the tiny blue veins beneath, the delicate flutter of his heartbeat in his throat. "He's not patient, and he's not going to give up." "What did you do?" Mrs. Shaw asked quietly. "To make him chase you like this?" "I ran." Vivian adjusted the blanket around the baby. "He had plans for me after the birth, plans that involved making me disappear. I decided I'd rather disappear on my own terms." Mrs. Kettering and Mrs. Shaw exchanged glances. "Your Grace," the midwife said carefully, "those are serious allegations. Making a woman disappear, that's not something a duke can simply do." "Can't he?" Vivian met her eyes. "He's rich, titled, connected to half the peerage. I'm just his wife. Who do you think people will believe when he says I've had a mental breakdown? When Dr. Pemberton signs documents saying I'm a danger to myself and my child?" Silence. "You don't believe me," Vivian said flatly. "It's not that." Mrs. Shaw wrung her hands. "It's just, he seems very concerned. Rode through the night to find you. That's not the behavior of a man who wants to harm his wife. That's the behavior of a man protecting his assets." Vivian's laugh was bitter. "The baby is his heir. I'm the legal mother. He needs both of us back under his control before he can proceed with whatever story he's invented to explain my absence." Footsteps on the stairs again. Heavier this time. Multiple people. The door swung open. Adrian stood in the doorway, flanked by 2 men Vivian didn't recognize. His clothes were travel-stained, his hair disheveled, the most imperfect she'd ever seen him. It should have made him less intimidating. Somehow it made him more dangerous. His eyes went immediately to the baby in her arms. Something flickered across his face. Relief, maybe, or calculation. "Vivian." Her name came out soft, concerned. "Thank God. When they told me you'd fled in the middle of the night, I thought—" He crossed to the bed, reaching for her. "Are you hurt? Is the baby—" "Don't touch me." Vivian pulled the baby closer. "Don't come any closer." Adrian froze. "Darling, you're confused. You've just been through a traumatic birth. You're not thinking clearly." "I'm thinking perfectly clearly. You ran away from home in a rainstorm, 7 months pregnant, climbed down a trellis, and tore your hands to shreds." He gestured to her bandaged palms. "You could have killed yourself. Killed our son. That's not rational behavior, Vivian." The 2 men with him were watching carefully. One of them was writing in a small notebook. Vivian's stomach dropped. "Who are they?" "Dr. Whitmore and his assistant. I brought them to examine you and the baby. Adrian's voice remained gentle, reasonable. To make sure you're both healthy after such an ordeal. I don't need another doctor. Mrs. Kettering delivered the baby safely. Mrs. Kettering is a country midwife. You need proper medical care. Adrian nodded to Dr. Whitmore. Please examine my wife. No. Vivian tried to sit up straighter, pain shooting through her body. I refuse. Get out. Dr. Whitmore moved toward the bed anyway. He was younger than Dr. Pemberton, with cold eyes and a thin smile that never reached them. Your Grace, I understand you're frightened, but you've just given birth prematurely. The baby may have complications. Let me help. I don't want your help. Vivian. Adrian's tone hardened. Don't be difficult. Let the doctor do his job. So he can write in that little notebook that I'm hysterical, unstable, refusing medical care? Vivian looked directly at the assistant, who was still writing. That's what this is, isn't it? You're documenting everything to use against me later. You see? Adrian addressed the doctors. Paranoid delusions. She thinks everyone is conspiring against her. It's been getting worse for months. I heard you. Vivian's voice rose. In the library, planning how you'd have me declared incompetent, how you'd take the baby and lock me away so you could be with Lydia Voss. Adrian's expression didn't change. Who's Lydia Voss? The question was so smoothly delivered, so genuinely puzzled, that for a moment Vivian questioned herself. But she'd heard the conversations. Read the letter. Watched Lydia arrive at the estate every Tuesday and Thursday. Your mistress, Vivian said. The woman you've been promising to marry once I'm out of the way. Darling, I don't have a mistress. Adrian turned to Dr. Whitmore. You see how elaborate the delusions have become? She's invented entire scenarios, complete with names and details. It's classic postpartum psychosis. I'm not psychotic.
You climbed down a trellis in a thunderstorm, Adrian said gently. Ran away to a strange town and gave birth 2 months early without proper medical supervision. You're bleeding, exhausted, and making wild accusations against your husband who's done nothing but try to protect you. Dr. Whitmore was nodding. The assistant was writing faster. Mrs. Kettering stepped forward. Now wait just a moment.
Mrs. Kettering. Adrian turned that gentle, reasonable voice on her. I appreciate everything you've done for my wife, truly, but this is a family matter, a medical matter, and I need to get Vivian somewhere she can receive proper care. She just gave birth, the midwife protested. She can't travel. I have a coach waiting. Dr. Whitmore will accompany us to ensure her safety. Adrian moved closer to the bed. Vivian, give me the baby. Let the doctor examine you. Then we'll take you home where you belong. No. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. I said no. Vivian's arms tightened around her son. The baby started to fuss, sensing her tension. Adrian's patience was wearing thin. She could see it in the tightness around his eyes, the way his hands clenched and unclenched. Dr. Whitmore, he said, is it safe for a mentally unstable woman to be holding a newborn infant? Generally speaking, no. The doctor moved closer. Your Grace, I really must insist. Touch me and I'll scream. Vivian looked past them to where Mrs. Kettering and Mrs. Shaw stood. I'll scream until the entire inn comes running, and then I'll tell them everything, about Lydia Voss, about the plan to have me declared insane, about how you married me for my dowry and now you're trying to erase me. No one will believe you. But Adrian's voice had lost some of its smoothness. You're a hysterical woman who abandoned her home and endangered her child. I'm the concerned husband trying to help her. Maybe. Vivian met his eyes. Or maybe someone will wonder why the Duke of Blackthorn chased his wife through the night. Why he brought doctors with notebooks instead of just bringing her home. Why he's so desperate to control the narrative. Adrian stared at her. For the first time since he'd entered the room, she saw something other than calculated concern on his face. He was realizing she wasn't going to be easy to contain anymore. Everyone out, he said quietly. I need to speak with my wife, alone. Dr. Whitmore hesitated. Your Grace, given her mental state, out, now. The doctors retreated. Mrs. Kettering started to protest, but Mrs. Shaw pulled her toward the door. Give them a moment. The door closed. The room felt smaller with just the two of them and the baby. Adrian pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down. When he spoke, all pretense of concern was gone. What do you want, Vivian?
I want you to leave me alone. Not possible. You're my wife. That's my son. We're going home. So you can lock me in an asylum and raise our child with your mistress? Vivian's laugh was harsh. I'd rather die. It won't come to that if you cooperate. Adrian leaned forward. Listen to me carefully. You've made this very complicated. Running away, causing a scene, making accusations. But we can still salvage this. You come home, we tell everyone you had a temporary breakdown brought on by premature labor. Very understandable. Very sympathetic. You rest, recover, bond with the baby. And we never speak of Lydia Voss or asylums or any of this again. And then what? Then we continue as we were. You play the Duchess. I manage the estate. We raise our son together. While you keep Lydia as your mistress. Adrian shrugged. If you're discreet, so will I be. Many marriages operate on such terms. It can work if both parties are reasonable. Vivian stared at him. You actually believe that's a reasonable offer? It's the best offer you're going to get. His voice hardened. Because if you don't accept it, I will have you declared incompetent. I have Dr. Pemberton's testimony, Dr. Whitmore's observations, witnesses who saw you behaving erratically. Your own family hasn't heard from you in months. They'll believe you've been struggling. And once you're committed, I'll have full custody of our son. You'll never see him again. The baby whimpered. Vivian realized she was holding him too tightly and forced herself to relax her grip. You're a monster, she whispered. I'm practical. Adrian stood. You have until morning to decide. Come home willingly or be taken home by force. Either way, you're coming home. He left. Vivian sat in the silence he'd left behind, her son sleeping fitfully in her arms, and tried to think through the exhaustion and pain. Adrian was right about one thing. She didn't have many options. She was weak from childbirth, bleeding, miles from her family with no way to reach them quickly. And she was married to a man with the money and connections to make good on every threat he'd made. But he'd also made a mistake. He'd shown his hand too clearly, brought doctors with notebooks, witnesses to document her instability. He was building his case now, in real time, because her running had forced him to accelerate his timeline, which meant he was worried, which meant she still had leverage. The door opened. Mrs. Shaw slipped in, carrying a tray with bread and tea. I thought you might be hungry, she said quietly. Vivian wasn't hungry, but she took the tea because it gave her something to do with her hands besides clutch her baby, like he might disappear. What did he say to you? Mrs. Shaw asked. He wants me to come home, pretend none of this happened. Let him control everything. And if you refuse, he'll have me committed to an asylum. Take the baby. Tell everyone I'm insane. Vivian sipped the tea. It was too sweet, but the warmth helped. He's probably right. I don't have the resources to fight him. I don't even have money for a coach fare north. Mrs. Shaw sat on the edge of the bed. My husband and I aren't wealthy people, Your Grace. We run an inn. We see travelers come and go. Most of them we forget the moment they leave. But every once in a while, someone comes through who matters. Who reminds us why we do this work. I don't understand. I'm saying you're not alone. Mrs. Shaw's eyes were fierce. You climbed down a trellis with torn hands to protect your baby. Gave birth 2 months early without crying once. And now you're sitting here exhausted and bleeding, planning your next move instead of giving up. That's not insanity, Your Grace. That's courage. Vivian felt tears prick her eyes. Courage doesn't win against dukes. Maybe not alone, Mrs. Shaw stood. But you'd be surprised what a town full of angry women can do when they decide someone needs protecting. She left before Vivian could ask what that meant. An hour later, Vivian found out. She was dozing, the baby finally sleeping peacefully against her chest, when voices erupted from downstairs. Loud voices, female voices. Mrs. Shaw's voice rose above the others. You can't just take a woman who's barely stopped bleeding from childbirth and force her into a coach. Dr. Whitmore. The Duke has legal authority. A new voice, older and sharp. The Duke has authority over his wife's property and finances. Not her body, not her medical care, and certainly not when she's under a midwife's supervision. Who the devil are you? That was Adrian, irritation cracking through his controlled tone. Eleanor Hartwell, I run the women's charity in this town, and I understand you're trying to remove a woman who just gave birth against medical advice. My wife requires specialized care. Your wife requires rest, which she won't get being jostled around in a coach for 6 hours. Another voice chimed in, Mrs. Kettering. I've sent for Dr. Morrison from the next town. He specializes in difficult births. He'll examine the Duchess in the morning and determine when she's fit to travel. I've already brought my own physician. Dr. Whitmore isn't licensed to practice in this county, Mrs. Hartwell said crisply. Dr. Morrison is. His assessment will carry more legal weight should any questions arise about the Duchess's care. The argument continued. More voices joined. Women Vivian didn't know, had never met, who had no reason to defend her except that Mrs. Shaw had apparently spread the word that a Duchess needed help. Through the floorboards, she could hear Adrian's frustration mounting. He was used to his word being law. But here, in this small town, where he had no connections and no leverage, he was just another man trying to bully women who'd decided they'd had enough of being bullied. By midnight, an uneasy truce had been reached. Adrian and his doctors could stay at the inn, but Vivian would remain under Mrs. Kettering's care until Dr. Morrison arrived in the morning to assess her fitness to travel. Mrs. Shaw reported all this with barely contained satisfaction when she came to check on Vivian around 1 in the morning. He's not happy, she said, but he's outnumbered, and Mrs. Hartwell pointed out that if anything happened to you during transport, there would be questions, official questions, the kind even a duke can't easily dismiss. He'll just wait until morning. Vivian shifted the baby to her other arm. When Dr. Morrison says I'm fit to travel, Adrian will take us both home. Maybe. Maybe not. Mrs. Shaw smiled. Mrs. Hartwell sent a messenger to your family's estate. Should arrive by tomorrow afternoon. Vivian's breath caught. How did she, I might have mentioned where you were trying to get to. Mrs. Hartwell has connections throughout the county. She got the message sent express. Tomorrow afternoon, if her parents received word by then, they could be here in 2 days, maybe 3. But Adrian wouldn't wait that long. He'd get Dr. Morrison's assessment in the morning and have Vivian in a coach heading back to Blackthorn Estate by noon, unless the assessment wasn't what he expected. Vivian looked down at her son, who was sleeping peacefully despite the chaos swirling around him. 2 months premature. Dangerously small. He should probably be under constant medical supervision, which meant the only responsible thing to do was keep him here, under a doctor's care, until he was strong enough to travel safely. And if keeping him here also kept her out of Adrian's control for a few more days, well, she'd learned from the best about sacrificing truth for convenience. Dr. Morrison arrived at dawn, a gray-haired man with kind eyes and steady hands. He examined Vivian thoroughly while Mrs. Kettering assisted and Adrian paced in the hallway outside. You're very weak, Dr. Morrison said, pressing gently on her abdomen. Lost more blood than I'd like. The premature delivery was hard on your body. But I'll recover? With proper rest and care, yes. He moved to examine the baby, unwrapping the blanket carefully. This little one concerns me more. Lungs sound weak. He's not feeding well. He tries, but he's so small. Too small. Dr. Morrison listened to the baby's heart. Born at 7 months? Just over. He needs specialized care. Warmth, careful feeding, constant monitoring. Moving him now would be dangerous, potentially fatal. Adrian's voice came from the doorway. How long before he's stable enough to travel? Dr. Morrison looked up. A week, maybe 2. Premature infants are fragile, Your Grace. The slightest stress can... 2 weeks? Adrian's control cracked. That's unacceptable. Nevertheless, that's my professional opinion. Dr. Morrison straightened. The baby stays here under medical supervision. The mother stays with the baby. If you choose to return to your estate, that's your decision. But they're not going anywhere. They're my wife and child, and they're my patients. Unless you'd like me to document that you're willing to risk an infant's life for your own convenience? Dr. Morrison's eyes were steely. I'd be happy to submit that assessment to the medical board. Adrian's face was a mask of barely contained fury, but he was trapped and he knew it. Fine, he said. 2 weeks. But I'm staying here, and I expect daily reports on their condition. He turned and left. Dr. Morrison waited until his footsteps faded before he leaned close to Vivian. Mrs. Hartwell explained the situation, he said quietly. The baby is fragile, but not quite as fragile as I made out. Still, he'll benefit from careful monitoring, and you'll benefit from time to rest and plan. You're lying for me. I'm being cautious with a premature infant. There's a difference. He smiled slightly. Your family has been contacted. They should arrive within 3 days. Until then, you have my protection and the protection of every woman in this town who's decided you deserve better than what your husband is offering. Vivian's throat tightened. Why are you helping me? You don't know me. I know enough. Dr. Morrison packed his instruments. I've been practicing medicine for 40 years. I know what a woman looks like when she's running from something. And I know that husbands who chase their wives through the night and bring their own doctors to document instability rarely have good intentions. He left her with instructions for the baby's care and a schedule for his return visits. Vivian spent the next 2 days in a strange limbo. Adrian stayed at the inn, taking meals in his room, appearing periodically to check on her progress with an expression that grew colder each time. Dr. Whitmore and his assistant had returned to Blackthorn Estate, their notebooks full of observations that Adrian would undoubtedly use eventually. But for now, Vivian was safe. The women of Millbrook had formed something like a protective circle around her. Mrs. Hartwell visited twice daily, bringing food and gossip and carefully worded advice about legal protections for married women. Mrs. Kettering stayed close, monitoring both Vivian and the baby, teaching Vivian how to feed him with a tiny spoon when he was too weak to nurse properly. Mrs. Shaw ran interference with Adrian, deflecting his demands and questions with cheerful stubbornness. And slowly, carefully, Vivian began to plan. She'd spent 3 years being the perfect Duchess. Compliant, decorative, unquestioning. It had gotten her nowhere except locked in a bedroom with her life planned out by a man who saw her as a problem to be managed. She was done being perfect. On the 3rd day, a coach bearing her family's crest pulled into the inn yard. Vivian was sitting by the window, the baby sleeping in a basket beside her, when she saw it. Her heart lurched. Her mother emerged first. Lady Catherine Hale, tall and severe in black traveling clothes, moving with the kind of purposeful grace that came from generations of aristocratic breeding. Her father followed, older than Vivian remembered, leaning on a cane. They'd come. Actually come. Adrian met them in the common room. Vivian could hear his voice through the floorboards, smooth, concerned, explaining the situation. Terrible ordeal, premature labor, very worried about her mental state. Her mother's voice cut through his explanation like a knife through butter. Where's my daughter? A pause. Then footsteps on the stairs. The door opened. Lady Catherine swept in, took one look at Vivian, and crossed to the bed. Let me see you. Vivian stood on shaking legs. Her mother's eyes moved over her, the bandaged hands, the pale face, the way she held herself like everything hurt. Who did this to you? Lady Catherine's voice was cold enough to freeze blood. I did it to myself, climbing down a trellis, running away. Vivian's laugh was shaky. Adrian will tell you I'm insane. Maybe I am. You're not insane. You're desperate. Her mother's hands were gentle on her face. When we got Mrs. Hartwell's message, your father wanted to write back, demand more information before making the journey. I told him to get in the coach immediately or I'd leave without him. You believed her? A stranger? I believed that my daughter hadn't written to us in 4 months, that every letter we'd received was stiff and formal and sounded nothing like you, that something was very wrong. Lady Catherine glanced at the basket where the baby slept. Is that my grandson? Yes. Her mother picked up the baby carefully, examined him with the practiced eye of a woman who'd raised 4 children. He's small. 2 months early. He's also beautiful. Lady Catherine looked up. What's his name? Vivian realized with a start that she hadn't named him yet. Adrian wanted Edward. She'd been too focused on survival to think about anything else. James, she said suddenly, after my grandfather. Her mother's expression softened. Your grandfather would be honored. Adrian appeared in the doorway. Lady Catherine, Lord Hale, I'm relieved you've arrived. Perhaps you can talk some sense into Vivian. Get out. Lady Catherine didn't raise her voice, didn't need to. My daughter just told me she named her son after my father. You weren't consulted. You weren't included. That tells me everything I need to know about this marriage. With respect, this is between myself and my wife. There is no with respect, Duke Blackthorn. Not anymore. Lady Catherine handed the baby back to Vivian. You married my daughter 3 years ago, isolated her from her family, controlled every aspect of her life. And when she finally ran, you chased her down like a hunting dog after a fox. That's not love, that's ownership. And I don't care how many titles you have, you don't own my child. She's legally my wife. And legally, I'm her mother with considerable influence in Parliament and social circles you need to maintain your precious reputation. Lady Catherine's smile was sharp. So let me be very clear. Vivian and James are coming home with us. You can either allow it gracefully, or I can make your life very difficult. Your choice. Adrian's jaw clenched. She can't simply leave. We're married. The child is my heir. The child is 2 months premature and needs medical care. Vivian is recovering from a difficult birth. Both of these facts are well documented by Dr. Morrison. Lady Catherine pulled out a folded paper. Who has written a very thorough report recommending that mother and child remain under his supervision at Rosewood Manor, where he has agreed to continue treating them. That's convenient. That's what happens when you're not universally beloved, Your Grace. People are willing to help those escaping your influence. She tucked the paper away. Dr. Morrison has also documented some very interesting observations about the doctors you brought with you. Their questions, their note-taking, their apparent focus on building a medical case for your wife's incompetence rather than actually treating her. Adrian went very still. That's slander. That's documentation, which I'll happily present to the medical board if you try to prevent Vivian from leaving. Lady Catherine crossed her arms. You wanted to play games with doctors and paperwork? Congratulations. So can I. And I have significantly more resources and considerably less to lose. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Adrian turned to Vivian. This is what you want? To run home to your parents like a child? This is what I want, Vivian said clearly. To be somewhere you can't control me. Somewhere I can raise my son without fear that you'll take him away. I'm his father. You're a man who planned to erase his wife. Being a father requires more than biology. She stood, the baby in her arms, her mother at her side. You can visit James? With supervision. You can even pretend to be the concerned husband who's respecting his wife's need to recover with family. But you don't get to take us back to Blackthorn Estate. Not now. Possibly not ever. Adrian stared at her like he was seeing a stranger. You've changed. No. Vivian met his eyes without flinching. I've just stopped pretending to be what you wanted me to be. He left without another word. Lady Catherine pulled Vivian into a careful embrace. You're safe now. Vivian let herself lean into her mother's strength and finally, allowed herself to believe it might be true. They left Millbrook the next morning in the Hale family coach, properly equipped with cushions and blankets and everything needed for a newborn and recovering mother. Mrs. Shaw and Mrs. Kettering came to say goodbye. Mrs. Hartwell presented Vivian with a list of lawyers who specialized in women's legal rights. Just in case you decide to make the separation permanent, she said. Adrian didn't come to see them off. He'd left before dawn, heading back to Blackthorn Estate alone. Vivian watched the inn disappear behind them and held her son close. She'd escaped. Actually escaped. And for the first time in 3 years, the future wasn't a trap closing around her. It was a door opening to possibilities she was only beginning to imagine. She'd escaped. Actually escaped. And for the first time in 3 years, the future wasn't a trap closing around her. It was a door opening to possibilities she was only beginning to imagine. Rosewood Manor appeared through morning mist like something from a half-forgotten dream. Vivian had grown up here, running through these gardens, climbing these trees, being scolded for tracking mud across these marble floors. It had felt small and confining when she was 19, desperate to escape into marriage and the wider world. Now it looked like sanctuary. Her father helped her down from the coach, his grip steadier than she'd expected. Welcome home, daughter. The words broke something in her chest. Vivian hadn't cried when Adrian threatened her, hadn't cried through childbirth or the desperate flight through the rain. But standing on the gravel drive of her childhood home, her son sleeping in her arms, she wept. Lady Catherine ushered her inside with brisk efficiency. Get her upstairs. The blue room. It has the best light. Send for Dr. Morrison, and someone bring tea. Proper tea, not that swill they served at the inn. The blue room was exactly as Vivian remembered it.
Windows overlooking the rose garden, a four-poster bed with embroidered curtains, the writing desk where she'd practiced her letters as a child. Someone had already prepared a cradle beside the bed, lined with soft blankets. "How did you—" Vivian started. "I sent word ahead that we were bringing you and a newborn." Her mother helped her out of her traveling clothes. "I'm not completely unprepared, despite what your father thinks." Vivian settled into the bed while her mother placed James in the cradle. The baby stirred, made a small sound, then settled back into sleep. "He's stronger than he looks," Lady Catherine observed. "He'd have to be. Surviving birth 2 months early, surviving me as a mother. You're doing fine. I climbed down a trellis and nearly killed us both. You escaped a dangerous situation using the only option available." Her mother sat on the edge of the bed. "That's not maternal failure, Vivian. That's courage. Everyone keeps saying that, courage, like I planned any of this." Vivian's laugh was brittle. "I was terrified the entire time. I still am." "Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting despite it." Lady Catherine took her hand carefully, mindful of the healing cuts. "Now, tell me everything, from the beginning, and don't leave anything out because you think it'll upset me." So Vivian told her, all of it. The letter she'd found 4 months ago, the overheard conversations, Adrian's plan to have her declared incompetent, Lydia Voss, the locked door, the desperate climb down the trellis, Dr. Pemberton's careful documentation of her supposed mental deterioration. Her mother listened without interrupting, her expression growing colder with each detail. "He's been planning this for months," Lady Catherine said when Vivian finished, "systematically isolating you, building his case. That's not impulse. That's premeditation." "I know. Which means he won't give up easily." Her mother stood, pacing to the window. "He'll try to get you back, and if that fails, he'll try to take James. The Blackthorn heir is too valuable to abandon." "What can I do? I'm still legally married to him. He has rights. Rights that can be challenged." Lady Catherine turned from the window. "Your father has been consulting with our lawyers. There are options. Not pleasant ones, but options." Over the next week, Vivian learned exactly what those options were. Divorce was nearly impossible. Adultery alone wasn't enough. She'd need to prove adultery combined with cruelty or desertion. And Adrian had been careful never to physically harm her, never to technically desert her. His control had been subtle, legal, the kind that looked like normal husbandly authority from the outside. Separation was easier but came with consequences. She could live apart from Adrian, but she'd have no legal claim to James. As the father, Adrian could demand custody at any time, unless she could prove him unfit. "That's the key," Mr. Whitfield, the family lawyer, explained during his 3rd visit to Rosewood. "If we can demonstrate that the Duke's behavior poses a danger to the child, a judge might grant you custody, despite the father's legal rights." "What kind of danger?" Vivian asked. "He never raised a hand to me, never threatened James directly." "Emotional cruelty counts. So does conspiracy to unlawfully confine you." Whitfield consulted his notes. "Dr. Morrison's report helps. It documents the suspicious circumstances of Dr. Whitmore's examination, the clear intent to build a case for institutionalization. That demonstrates a pattern of manipulation and abuse." "Is it enough?" "Alone? No. We need more. Witnesses, documentation. Ideally, we need Lydia Voss herself to testify." "She'll never do that. She's complicit in everything. People's loyalties change when their own interests are threatened." Whitfield smiled thinly. "Give it time." Time was something Vivian had now. Days stretched into weeks. James grew stronger, his lungs clearing, his appetite improving. Vivian's hands healed, the cuts fading to thin white scars. Dr. Morrison declared them both healthy enough that his constant supervision was no longer necessary, though he continued weekly visits. Adrian sent letters, polite, formal letters asking about James's health, requesting permission to visit, expressing hope that Vivian was recovering from her ordeal. She didn't answer them. He sent gifts, expensive toys for James, jewelry for Vivian, flowers. Her mother sent them all back unopened. "Let him wonder," Lady Catherine said. "Let him worry. Men like Adrian need control. Take it away, and they make mistakes." The mistake came 6 weeks after Vivian had fled Blackthorn Estate.
She was in the garden with James, letting him feel sunshine on his face while she read through the latest batch of legal documents when a servant announced a visitor. "Lady Lydia Voss," the servant said uncertainly. "She says it's urgent." Vivian's first instinct was to refuse, but curiosity won. "Show her to the drawing room. I'll be there shortly." She handed James to his nurse and went to face her husband's mistress. Lydia Voss looked different than Vivian remembered. Still beautiful, still expensively dressed, but with shadows under her eyes and a tension in her shoulders that spoke of sleepless nights. She stood when Vivian entered, then seemed unsure whether to sit again or remain standing. "Thank you for seeing me," Lydia said. "I haven't decided if that was wise yet." Vivian settled into a chair, deliberately not offering Lydia one. "What do you want?" "To tell you the truth," Lydia twisted her hands together. "About Adrian. About everything." "I know the truth. I heard you planning my removal, remember?" "You heard part of it." Lydia finally sat, uninvited. "You didn't hear the rest." "Then enlighten me." Lydia took a breath. "Adrian promised to marry me. After you were dealt with. He said he'd find a way to end the marriage properly, that I'd be the next Duchess of Blackthorn. I believed him because I wanted to believe him." "How touching." "It was a lie." Lydia's voice hardened. "He never intended to marry me. He just needed me cooperative while he secured his heir and removed you. Once that was accomplished, I'd have been dismissed. Paid off, probably. Given a stipend to keep quiet and disappear." "And you know this how?" "Because I'm not the first." Lydia met her eyes. "There was a woman before me. Caroline something. Adrian had her convinced he'd marry her too, once his first wife died. Except the first wife didn't die. She had a breakdown and was institutionalized. Very sad, very convenient, and Caroline disappeared with a generous settlement and a signed agreement never to speak of their relationship." Vivian's stomach turned. "He's done this before, at least once that I know of. Possibly more." Lydia pulled papers from her bag. "I found letters. In his study. After you left, he was distracted, careless. He left a drawer unlocked. These are from Caroline. They reference the promises he made, the plans they discussed. It's all there." She held out the letters. Vivian took them, scanning quickly. The handwriting was different from Lydia's, but the content was horrifyingly familiar. "You promised me. Once she's gone, once you're free, we'll be together properly." "Why are you showing me this?" Vivian asked. "Why betray him now? Because I'm next." Lydia's laugh was bitter. "I confronted him about Caroline. He didn't deny it, just told me I was being emotional, that our situation was different. Then he offered me £5,000 and a cottage in Scotland to disappear quietly before you return to Blackthorn Estate." "I'm not returning to Blackthorn Estate." "He doesn't believe that. He thinks you're being stubborn, that eventually you'll cave to social pressure and come back. When you do, he wants me gone, so there's no complication." Lydia leaned forward. "I was convenient when he needed someone to help destabilize you. Now I'm inconvenient, so I'm being erased, just like you were supposed to be erased. And you thought you'd get revenge by helping me. I thought I'd get justice by telling the truth." Lydia's eyes were fierce. "Adrian has been manipulating women for years, using us, discarding us, facing no consequences because he's rich, entitled, and charming. I want him to face consequences. I want the world to know what he is." Vivian studied the woman who'd been her enemy for months. Lydia's motivations weren't pure. This was as much about wounded pride and thwarted ambition as about justice. But wounded pride could be useful. "If you testify against him," Vivian said slowly, "if you tell a court what you just told me, you'll be ruined. Publicly admitted mistress of a married duke. No respectable household will receive you." "I'm already ruined. The moment Adrian decided I was disposable." Lydia straightened. "At least this way, I take him down with me." Vivian looked at the letters in her hands. This was it. The evidence Mr. Whitfield needed. Proof of a pattern of behavior, witness testimony from someone with intimate knowledge of Adrian's methods. "I'll have our lawyer contact you," she said. "Be prepared to tell him everything. Dates, details, other names if you know them. And be prepared for Adrian to fight back hard." "Let him," Lydia stood. "I spent 2 years being his accomplice. Time to spend some time being his downfall instead." She left, head high,
a woman who'd made her choice and would live with the consequences. Vivian sat in the drawing room for a long time after, reading through Caroline's letters, piecing together a picture of her husband that was even uglier than she'd imagined. Adrian wasn't just cruel or manipulative, he was methodical. He had a system: marry for money and connections, isolate the wife, secure an heir, manufacture a crisis that justified removing the wife, install a mistress who believed she'd be the next Duchess, then discard the mistress when she became inconvenient. How many times had he done this? How many women had he used and discarded? And how close had Vivian come to being just another name in his collection of destroyed lives? Mr. Whitfield was thrilled with Lydia's testimony and Caroline's letters. This changes everything. We can demonstrate a clear pattern of predatory behavior. No judge will grant him custody knowing this. Will it be enough for divorce? Vivian asked. It might be. Combined with the adultery, the conspiracy to confine you, Dr. Morrison's testimony about the suspicious medical examinations. Whitfield shuffled papers. It's unprecedented, but we live in changing times. The law is beginning to recognize that women deserve some protection from abusive husbands. Beginning to recognize. Vivian's laugh was harsh. How generous. I didn't say the system was fair, Your Grace. I said it was changing, slowly, imperfectly, but changing nonetheless. The case was filed 3 days later. Vivian Hale, Duchess of Blackthorn, petitioning for legal separation from her husband on grounds of adultery, emotional cruelty, and conspiracy to unlawfully confine, with a request for full custody of their son, James. The scandal erupted like a bomb in the aristocratic world. Dukes didn't get sued by their wives. Duchesses didn't air their marital problems in public courts. This wasn't how things were done among the upper classes. You suffered in silence, maintained appearances, and absolutely never involved the legal system in what should be private family matters. Vivian didn't care. Adrian responded within a week with his own petition. His wife was mentally unstable, had abandoned her home and husband, endangered their child through reckless behavior. He wanted custody of James and for Vivian to be placed under medical supervision for her own safety. The battle lines were drawn. The hearing was set for 8 weeks out, enough time for both sides to prepare their cases. Those 8 weeks were the longest of Vivian's life. Adrian launched a campaign to destroy her reputation. Stories appeared in society columns about the Duchess of Blackthorn's erratic behavior, her wild flight from home, her family's history of mental instability. That last one was complete fabrication, but it spread anyway. Vivian fought back with the truth. Lydia's testimony was leaked to sympathetic journalists. Caroline's letters found their way into the right hands. Suddenly, the story wasn't unstable Duchess abandons husband, but Duke's pattern of abuse exposed by brave women. Public opinion, that fickle beast, began to shift. The women who'd helped Vivian escape, Mrs. Shaw, Mrs. Kettering, Mrs. Hartwell, gave interviews describing the desperate pregnant Duchess who'd arrived bloody and terrified, fleeing a husband who'd brought doctors to document her supposed insanity. Dr. Morrison published his report about Dr. Whitmore's suspicious examination. Adrian's perfect facade started to crack. Then, 3 weeks before the hearing, something unexpected happened. Caroline came forward. She was older than Vivian expected, maybe 40, living quietly in a cottage in Devon on Adrian's settlement money. But she'd read about Vivian's case and decided silence had cost her enough. I was 18 when I met him, Caroline told Vivian when they met at Rosewood. Naive, romantic, stupid. He was married to a woman named Elizabeth. Said she was cold, distant, that the marriage was in name only. He made me believe I was special. What happened to Elizabeth? She had a breakdown. At least, that's what Adrian claimed. She started acting strangely, forgetting things, making wild accusations, behaving erratically in public. Sound familiar? Vivian's blood ran cold. He did to her what he tried to do to me. Exactly the same pattern. Dr. Pemberton signed the documents declaring her mentally incompetent. She was sent to a private facility, died there 2 years later. Very sad, very convenient. Adrian inherited everything. And you? I believed his grief was real. Thought we'd finally be together. Caroline's smile was bitter. He paid me off 6 months later. Told me he couldn't marry his dead wife's companion. It would look improper. Gave me money and made me sign papers promising never to speak of our relationship. Why break that promise now? Because I've lived with the guilt for 15 years, wondering if Elizabeth really was insane or if I helped him destroy her, wondering how many other women he's done this to. Caroline leaned forward. When I read about you, about what you did, climbing down that trellis, fighting back instead of quietly disappearing, I thought maybe it's not too late to do the right thing. Mr. Whitfield nearly wept when Caroline agreed to testify. This is it. This proves premeditation across multiple marriages. No judge can ignore this. But Adrian wasn't finished fighting. 2 weeks before the hearing, he played his final card. Vivian was in the nursery with James when her mother burst in, face white, holding a newspaper. He's claiming James isn't his, Lady Catherine said. Sick it. Lady Dent. The words didn't make sense at first. Then Vivian snatched the paper and read the interview. The Duke of Blackthorn, speaking to a sympathetic journalist, expressing doubts about the paternity of his supposed heir. After all, his wife had fled so quickly, given birth 2 months early. Perhaps the child was premature, or perhaps the child wasn't his at all. That's insane, Vivian said. James looks exactly like him. Same dark hair, same eyes. He's planting doubt. If he can convince people the baby might not be his, he doesn't need custody. He can simply disown James and you both. It was brilliant in its cruelty. Adrian couldn't win custody through conventional means. The evidence against him was too damning. But if he could make society question James's paternity, he could abandon them both without consequence. Vivian would be left penniless, her son branded illegitimate, her reputation destroyed, unless she could prove James was Adrian's child beyond any doubt. There's a way, Mr. Whitfield said when they consulted him. Medical examination, blood typing. It's new science, not always accepted in court, but Dr. Morrison could perform the test. Compare the baby's blood to the Duke's. Adrian will never agree to that. He won't have to. We'll petition the court to order it. If he refuses, it makes him look guilty. The petition was filed. Adrian fought it, claiming it was invasive and unnecessary. But the judge, intrigued by the scientific angle and tired of the increasingly messy case, ordered both Adrian and James to submit to blood testing. The test was performed 1 week before the hearing. Vivian wasn't allowed to be present, conflict of interest, but her mother attended as witness. The results came back 3 days later. Dr. Morrison delivered them personally to Rosewood, his expression grave. The blood types are compatible, he said. James shares the Duke's blood type. Combined with the timing of birth and the physical resemblance, there's no scientific doubt. James is Adrian's biological son. Vivian felt like she could breathe for the first time in weeks. He can't deny him now. No, but Your Grace, there's something else you should know. Dr. Morrison hesitated. During the examination, I noticed something about the Duke. Signs of advanced liver disease. He's dying. The room tilted. What? I'd estimate he has 6 months, maybe a year. The alcohol consumption, the stress, it's taken its toll. I doubt he knows how serious it is. Men like him rarely seek medical care until it's too late. Vivian should have felt something. Pity, maybe, or satisfaction. Instead, she just felt tired. Does this change anything? She asked. It might. A dying man fighting for custody of his heir looks desperate. It could work in our favor. Dr. Morrison stood to leave. Or it could make him more dangerous. Nothing more unpredictable than a man with nothing left to lose. The hearing arrived with the weight of inevitability. The courtroom was packed. Aristocrats who'd never attended a legal proceeding in their lives had shown up to watch the scandal unfold. Journalists filled the back rows. Vivian recognized faces from balls and dinner parties, women who'd smiled at her while knowing what Adrian was doing, men who'd been complicit in his schemes. Adrian sat on the opposite side of the room with his lawyers, looking thinner than she remembered, his skin faintly yellow. Their eyes met once. His expression was unreadable. The hearing lasted 3 days. Lydia testified about the affair, the promises, the plan to have Vivian declared incompetent. She was brilliant on the stand, composed, detailed, unflinching when Adrian's lawyers tried to discredit her as a vengeful mistress. Caroline testified about Elizabeth, about the pattern of manipulation and disposal. Her voice shook, but she didn't back down. Dr. Morrison testified about the suspicious medical examination, about finding Vivian desperate and terrified,
about the premature baby who shouldn't have survived without his mother's fierce determination. Mrs. Kettering, Mrs. Shaw, and Mrs. Hartwell testified about the pregnant Duchess who'd arrived bloody and desperate, about the husband who'd chased her with doctors and notebooks, about the community that had protected her because something felt terribly wrong. Adrian's lawyers tried to paint Vivian as unstable, dramatic, a woman who'd overreacted to normal marital difficulties. They called witnesses who testified to her isolation, her anxiety, her erratic behavior. But Mr. Whitfield demolished them one by one, showing how every symptom of instability was actually a rational response to being systematically isolated and gaslit by a manipulative husband. On the third day, Vivian herself took the stand. She told her story simply, without embellishment. The letter she'd found, the conversation she'd overheard, the locked door, the desperate decision to climb down a trellis because the alternative was disappearing into an asylum and never seeing her son again. "Did you love your husband?" Adrian's lawyer asked during cross-examination. Vivian considered the question. "I loved who I thought he was. I don't know if that person ever actually existed, but you married him willingly, bore his child willingly. I married him believing he loved me in return. I bore his child believing we'd raise him together. When I learned both those beliefs were false, I left. That's not abandonment, that's survival." The lawyer tried several more angles, but Vivian didn't break. She'd survived childbirth 2 months early in a strange coaching inn. A courtroom cross-examination was nothing. The judge retired to consider his verdict. They waited 3 hours, long enough for Vivian to feed James, pace the courthouse halls, and question every decision that had led to this moment. Then they were called back. The judge was old, severe, the kind of man who'd probably never questioned the social order in his life. Vivian's heart sank looking at him. "This case has been highly irregular," he began. "Scandalous, even. The court does not look favorably on private marital matters being aired so publicly." "Here it comes," Vivian thought. "He's going to rule for Adrian. Send me back. Take James away." However, the judge's expression was grim. The evidence presented is deeply troubling. The testimony of multiple credible witnesses paints a picture of systematic manipulation and abuse. The Duke's pattern of behavior across multiple marriages suggests predatory intent. And the attempt to question the child's paternity after medical evidence confirmed it appears to be nothing more than a calculated attempt to avoid responsibility. Adrian's face was stone. "Therefore, I am granting the Duchess of Blackthorn's petition for legal separation. She is awarded full custody of the minor child, James. The Duke will be permitted supervised visitation twice monthly should he choose to exercise that right. The Duke is also ordered to provide financial support for both the Duchess and the child in perpetuity." The courtroom erupted. Adrian's lawyers were already calling for appeals. Journalists were running for the doors to file their stories. Vivian sat frozen, trying to process that she'd won. Actually won. The judge wasn't finished. "Furthermore, I am referring this case to the medical board for investigation into Dr. Pemberton's role in documenting the Duchess's supposed mental instability, and to the Lord Chancellor's office for review of the Duke's fitness to hold his title, given the serious allegations of conspiracy to unlawfully confine a woman." That caused even more chaos. A Duke being investigated by the Lord Chancellor was unprecedented. Adrian stood abruptly and left the courtroom without a word. Vivian watched him go and felt nothing but relief. It was over. Actually, truly over. The ride back to Rosewood was surreal. Her parents tried to make conversation, but Vivian couldn't focus. She kept expecting someone to burst in and say there'd been a mistake, that the ruling was overturned, that she had to go back. But no one came. That night, after James was asleep and the household had settled, Vivian stood on the balcony of her room and looked out over the garden she'd grown up in. She'd won her freedom, won custody of her son, destroyed the reputation of a man who'd thought himself untouchable. But the victory felt hollow somehow. 3 years of her life gone. Trust shattered, innocence lost. She'd never be the naive girl who'd believed in romance and happy endings again. Maybe that was the point. Maybe losing that innocence was the price of survival. 3 months later, word came that Adrian had died. The liver disease Dr. Morrison had diagnosed had progressed rapidly. He died alone in Blackthorn Estate, surrounded by wealth and power, and no one who actually cared if he lived or died. Vivian felt nothing when her mother told her. No grief, no relief, just nothing. "You're a widow now," Lady Catherine said gently. "And James is the Duke of Blackthorn."
A 1-year-old duke with a mother who'd have to manage the estate until he came of age. The estate Adrian had killed for, manipulated for, destroyed lives for. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it just felt like responsibility. But Vivian had learned something in the past year. She was strong enough to carry responsibility, strong enough to fight for what mattered, strong enough to refuse to be erased.
She had her son. She had her freedom. She had proof that she could survive things she'd never thought possible. And she had a voice now, one that had spoken truth in a courtroom and been heard. Other women had reached out to her after the trial, women in similar situations, asking for help, for advice, for hope that they could escape too. Maybe that was her legacy. Not the title, not the estate, not the scandal, but the proof that women could fight back, could refuse to disappear quietly, could survive and rebuild and become something more than what men tried to make them. 5 years later, Vivian stood in the same gardens at Rosewood, watching James run through the roses with the kind of wild joy only a 6-year-old could muster. He looked like Adrian, same dark hair, same sharp features, but he had Vivian's eyes and, she hoped, a better heart than his father had ever possessed. "Mother," James called, "look what I found!" He ran over with a beetle in his palm, delighted by the discovery. Vivian examined it appropriately, made admiring noises, and sent him off to show his grandfather. She'd remarried the previous year, a quiet ceremony, a kind man who'd known her story and loved her anyway. Someone who saw her as a partner, not a possession. Still felt strange sometimes, trusting again. But she was learning. Blackthorn Estate was being managed by trustees until James came of age. Vivian had no interest in living there, in walking those halls where Adrian had planned her destruction. Let it stand as a monument to his cruelty, or let it fall into ruin. She didn't care. She'd built a new life here at Rosewood, founded a charity that helped women escape abusive marriages, funded legal aid for those who couldn't afford lawyers, became, in her own quiet way, dangerous to men who thought they could control and discard women without consequence. Adrian had tried to erase her. Instead, she'd become impossible to ignore. The sun was setting over the gardens, painting everything gold and amber. James's laughter echoed across the lawn, and Vivian stood watching, no longer a frightened girl climbing down a trellis in the rain, but a woman who'd survived and refused to let survival be the end of her story. She'd made it something more, something that mattered. And in the grand halls of estates across the country, in drawing rooms where women whispered behind fans, in courtrooms where laws were slowly, painfully changing, her name was spoken not with pity, but with respect. The Duchess who'd refused to disappear, the woman who'd fought back and won, not perfectly, not easily, but completely. And that, Vivian thought, watching her son chase butterflies through flowers that would bloom again next spring, and the spring after that, was legacy enough.